Hey, everyone. We are back. How's everyone doing? How's everyone going? Wow, we're off to a great start here today. Oh, I have some echo. Let me fix that. Wow, lots of little missteps at the outset here. I don't know what's going on. Just one of those days, I guess. Well, we're back. Hello. I've got me some more tea, some Earl Grey today. Still quite hot, so I'm not gonna get to it yet. And I know we were mulling about yesterday, figuring out like, should we like do some debate review today or something like that. But actually, Amazon Kane gave me a really good suggestion. I think that we're better off following her advice there, which is to see if the author Maia Kobabe did any interviews that we could go over. This was derived a little bit from the suggestion that I could reach out and maybe get him on stream, but it seems unlikely from my position. Not just like I'm a middle school streamer, but also like contact is kind of difficult. From what I've seen, the only method would be like through air agents. And at that point, what are the odds, So maybe I could reach out, but like, it doesn't seem that likely. However, it's not the only source of hearing what a person thinks. Uh, he has done interviews in the past. I found one from SPX. I haven't seen it, so we'll see how interesting that panel discussion is, how interesting that interview is. But while we're on the subject, I also want to make a bit of an admission. One thing that happens sometimes, and I'm sure this has happened to everyone, is you'll make a statement based unintentionally out of your own ignorance and not realizing like the mistake that is involved there. And that's what I did. So I had been mentioning that it'd be really nice if there were a version of genderqueer that is appropriate for younger audiences. Um, but I didn't think that to check. Uh, I didn't think to check if there were any books in that regard. Now I'm not sure because I haven't read the contents of them, but uh, if you give me a moment. Oh, why is this? Okay, there we go. Yeah, of course he has other books. And some of them, like, I mean, I don't know about the contents. These are also not the ones that I had come across. There was one that I had seen that was definitely um, appropriate for children. I wonder if I can find it. Um, I found it here. It's in, I think it was on Instagram. No, it wasn't on Instagram. Maybe official publisher page. There was another one that was like definitely very appropriate for children. Yeah, I'm getting different lists from all this. Maybe on Red Gold Sparks. No, this isn't it. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is, yeah, yeah. Of course, there are other books, and of course, and some of them are more appropriate for children. I don't know about these ones necessarily. I mean, this is a coloring book, so maybe. Um, there was one I saw. It was like a non-binary bunny's tale or whatever. Yeah, that seems pretty appropriate. But a lot of because we talk about this one book and we look at it with this kind of assumption that this is the method by which air experience is being told, but like no, obviously not exclusively. He's a creative. He's a writer and an artist. Like not going to stop at one book and then be done with it. So there are other books, and that compounds, I think, what we were talking about yesterday concerning the fact that there's a lot of hubbub about this, of like, oh, it's being aimed at children. Is it? Was it being targeted aimed at younger audiences? Given that there are other books from the same author for different age ranges, maybe it wasn't. This is a memoir. Maybe it's just telling their story. Okay, but the outrage is because it is a work by a queer author that involves graphics that are inappropriate for children, and they'll at a minimum pretend it's being aimed at children. Now I don't know that it is, and I don't know that it isn't. So I don't want to give the impression that I know for sure it wasn't intended for teens. But obviously, as we discussed yesterday when we were dealing with the amount to which this book was banned as compared to things like the Turner Diaries, or one thing I didn't think of until afterwards, literally Mein Kampf didn't make the list. You know, like there are things that you would expect to be banned significantly more than this, but aren't because it's ideological. It's not about the contents at all. So that all being said, I found this interview at SPX 2022 panel, so it's fairly recent. I don't know what SPX is, but there are a couple of. I think there's another longer interview that I saw here, but it might have been from the same event. But you see, there are a couple of smaller interviews, so we'll see how we'll keep going. Yeah, okay, the CXC. This is another event that we might be able to check out. So we'll start here and we'll see how it goes. We'll have a little watch party.
Hear me? Doing what field mouse.
Skip through the like getting set up, but let's watch it in its entirety. Oh, going backwards gets a delay. YouTube, what's up?
Grass Valley, California.
How's everyone doing today, by the way?
Pleasure to sit down and talk with Maia Kobabe today.
Kobabe. All right. I was wrong. Kobabe. My bad. I guess that's what happens when you only read it. But apparently I had pronounced her name wrong. Apologies. I probably am pronouncing the pronouns wrong too. But we'll correct ourselves and move on.
Graphic memoir, Genderqueer, published in 2019 by Oni Press. Thank you. Yes, it is wonderful.
It is.
Thank you.
Claps.
You. It's
quite enjoyed it.
I think it's both a touching personal story, but then also a useful primer for people that are unaware or have questions about gender and gender identity. This book was awarded the 2020 ALA Alex Award as well as the Stonewall Israel Fishman Award. It's also one of the most challenged and banned books across the United States, both in local libraries and in school libraries.
Oh, interesting that it's banned in local libraries as well. I didn't know that part. That seems to compound what we were saying prior, right? Local libraries have books for people of all ages. You can that's the whole point. Everyone should be able to go there and check out a book. Now, as it happens, most people who are going to libraries tend to be younger, but that's not necessarily the case. And that a book should be banned, why? I think we know why, and I think we've covered why. But I just want to highlight that.
Conservative activists have targeted LGBTQ stories. It's been kind of the focal point for a lot of the conversation about what it means to have free speech in the United States.
And everyone talks about it. It's really
Maia's
wild.
Work has also been featured in the New York Times, on Slate, and in the Washington Post. Maia, thank you for talking with me today.
Thank you. I'm excited.
Like, I've literally heard Tim Pool mention this book. I've heard, random streamers mention it. Like, it's talked about all over the place. It's kind of like the face of, look at the indoctrination of the children with pornography. But, like, is it that at all? I'm guessing most people haven't cracked the book open. Even we found it was inappropriate and still realized, like, there are problems with the banning and that it's a valuable book.
This is a wonderful
Definitely has a lot to say.
I'm excited for everyone to get to learn a little bit more about your process, but I wanted to start really at the beginning
hey, Jimbo.
Of the
How you doing?
Of the conversation here by just addressing the elephant in the room, which is the conversation around censorship.
Yeah.
So censorship is obviously a big concern for cartoonists. I think comics are uniquely vulnerable to censorship because of the graphic nature of them.
I was wondering that too. As they were talking about being banned in local libraries, I was thinking maybe it's because it's a pictorial depiction of sex acts and nudity, but is that really relevantly different than a written depiction? Listen, I don't know if anyone's a fan of Chuck Palahniuk. Those books highly inappropriate for people under 18, even though that's when I was reading them. Uh, Very graphic in their descriptions of both violence and sex. Those aren't banned. A lot of the books of his that I read, I checked out from local libraries. Uh, but this book is banned. Is that like you can ask maybe because it's you know an image as opposed to just the words, but I still lean towards it being ideological. Don't know who that is. That's the author of Fight Club. Wrote a bunch of other books of varying levels of intensity, but they're usually very adult in theme. I think he's a good author, but it's it's yeah, like it's not for everybody. And there are some very very gross scenes in throughout several of his books. In particular, I'm blanking on the name of the book. Now I want to find it. Um, uh, is it Haunted? I think it's Haunted. Has a lot of really really disgusting scenes in there. Now, don't get me wrong, I enjoyed it, but um, definitely like way way worse, like orders of magnitude worse than anything we found in genderqueer. But this book isn't banned, nor do I think it should be. By the way, I don't think this should be banned from local libraries, nor do I think genderqueer should be. But I wonder if it's like, was it because it's visual? Even if that's a consideration, right? Like the how graphic things get is so much worse in Haunted than it is in genderqueer, that like the difference in how it's presented between text and image shouldn't matter even a little. I don't need all of these tabs. Let's try to let's try to monitor the proliferation of tabs here. Keep it in check.
Such a big portion, and parts of genderqueer that have been attacked or addressed in these censorship claims are the scene where with the reads, your discussion about masturbation, the period blood, things like that, that are just like a normal part of life, but have been kind of attacked as obscene.
I don't like this question a little bit because it ignores the worst offenders. I am on board for the things he's talking about of like the subject of masturbation. It comes up. 13-year-olds have health class. They know what that is. You know, or like period blood. Again, 13-year-olds have health class. By 13, a large number of students will have had periods. Like close to half, I would imagine. But you know, that's not the worst of it. It kind of implies like it doesn't. That's as bad as it gets. I'm even putting it in poor terms. Like I don't like saying as bad as it gets, but that's as like saying that's the most objectionable it gets. Whereas, as we found, the worse, the more objectionable stuff is the depiction of sex acts, right? And while that is something I'd prefer to talk about, maybe he's trying to address the easy stuff first, and then we'll get to the more questionable stuff. But this question, I think, a little bit implies it implies too much charity in the opposite way. It's actually kind of interesting because we haven't seen people talk about it, but I've made reference to people referring to things nebulously as like, oh, this book is rated R, it's so bad, yada yada, without and letting your imagination fill in the contents in a negative light. Now we're seeing the opposite direction, right? You're letting the imagination fill in a more charitable contents than what's actually there by not mentioning the more objectionable portions. But again, maybe he'll get to it, and maybe there's an expectation that the people here will have read the book, so you're not really hiding anything.
I think your book is not the only book that's been challenged.
No.
You have unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, been the face of the book challenge. I think the number is something nearly 1,200 books in the last 9 months have been challenged or banned in school and local libraries, and over 800 authors have been affected by these bans.
That's a lot, and it's
That's all
concerning.
horrible, but I kind of want to know.
And so something to keep in mind about those numbers, and part of why it could be concerning. You might make the argument that like, okay, books should be banned if there are books that are inappropriate for schools, maybe they should be banned on kind of a regular basis. But then you won't see a giant uptick like that. You won't see 1,200 books in the course of 9 months or be banned or be targeted for this kind of thing. It is in response to an ideological wave. That's what's concerning, right? The interest in suppressing the voices of particularly queer authors, uh, but authors in general as well, uh, and the interest in strictly limiting what children could even have access to as far as what they understand. Part of like a necessary part of bigotry and reactionary thought is to not allow younger people to experience ideas and notions that the reactionary, the bigot, doesn't like. It's a well discussed phenomenon that the most racist parts of the United States are the places with the least diversity. It's they hate they're racist because they don't know these people. But this is why you also get the phenomenon of people go to liberal arts college and they walk away being pretty like a lot more liberal than when they went, because you're just around new people, new ideas, and you're learning, and that is anathema to the reactionary.
How has that affected your artistic practice, your mental health, your position in this space?
Oh, we're not even going
Yeah,
to
we
actually
decided to
discuss the
talk about
contents.
kind of
We're just
book
going to
bans
okay.
and challenges right off the top because I think it's very current and fresh in people's minds, and also then we could get past it and talk about more fun stuff after that.
Absolutely.
But yeah, we wanted to start with this. It's been so weird, specifically because this book did come out in 2019, and then all of this media controversy started in late 2021.
Yeah, super important to note. This is exactly what I was talking about. If this was such an issue from the outset, why didn't it happen immediately? It happened because it happened later because there was the controversy that got wrapped up. People were started getting into their fervor. Also, like the book bannings in Florida. I know people don't like calling it that, but like whatever. Like DeSantis cracking down on what is appropriate in schools and not. This is why this started happening. Not that the book came out and therefore and demanded such a reaction, so much as the reaction demanded a book to target.
So to have so much media attention on a book that is not really a new release was unusual. And then I don't know. I mean, I'm very aware that trans and queer material is frequently challenged, and I
Yep.
had another author who had read an early draft who I was in a writing group with, who has also had works be challenged, tell me on reading a draft, like, this book will probably be challenged, and take it as a compliment when that happens, and also get to know the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund now. And those were very wise words that when the book indeed was challenged, I thought back to, and I was like, he was right, he knew, he called it. And this is Jimmy Robinson, who wrote Five Weapons, among other series. And so a little part of me was prepared. I mean, I braced myself a little bit when the book first came out.
No, that said, okay, so this harkens back a little bit to what I was thinking prior. If there was an expectation that this book was going to get challenged, maybe like leaning away from the more graphic stuff, making it more defensible, strengthens your position. Now, I'm talking from a position of political strategy and like efficacy, not telling your best story, which is obviously what an author is going to try to do. But also, I don't know what the intended audience was. Like, if the intended audience was 18 plus, it doesn't matter, you know. But knowing ahead of time it's likely to get challenged. If that book is unimpeachable, except for this discussion of like transness, non-binary identity, queer culture, neo pronouns, things like that. If obviously the only objection is that it's quote unquote woke stuff, it becomes a lot easier a fight to have. That's an unreasonable expectation on an author, I think. Obviously, like, you should tell the story you want to tell in the best way that it should be told. Unfortunately, we live in a world where even you knew ahead of time that it was going to be a political battleground, and it's so much like if I get into a conversation with someone who wants to challenge this book, I can't defend it because there's content that's clearly I can't defend it from being banned in schools, I should say, because there's content that's clearly inappropriate for anyone under 18. But I mean, I can defend it on the grounds of like, why is it being banned from local libraries? But if it were such that there was nothing inappropriate for anyone under 18, or at the very least, like anyone 13 and up, it would be appropriate. It'd be so much easier to have that argument and be like, what's wrong with it? And make them say the bigotry out loud. But now people can can pretend there is no bigotry and just say, well, look at the graphic content. Even though that's obviously disingenuous, as we've discussed, there's a lot more graphic content that isn't banned in this way. And certainly not years after the fact.
Out, I was also in the middle of trying to work towards top surgery, but I did start seeing like a therapist a couple months before the book came out, and part of my thought in the back of my head was like, you know, if the shit hits the fan, let's have a working relationship with a therapist in place.
Also, therapy is good, you know, on its own.
It was like much delayed after the release, so by that point, I had assumed that if there would be a challenge, it would have already happened, but then it did. I think the timing of it is what caught me by surprise, not that it happened at all. And it has been stressful, and it has been time-consuming, I think is the big thing. There were various weeks in fall of last year and then also spring of this year where I was getting so many interview requests that I was like, I could, if I'm not careful, become a person who
I caught one of your streams. Nice. Oh, hey, Nikki G. Glad to have you here. Glad you're enjoying it. We're, well, as you can see, we're going over an interview with Maia Kobabe that I had pronounced incorrectly previously. You know, nice to have you.
Public speaker and has no time to write or draw, when what I want to be is an author who occasionally public speaks. I don't want to be just like a full-time public speaker. So like kind of trying to figure out how...
Yeah, I'm not surprised at that at all. The media circuit, it was one of those like, he seems really comfortable here, but like through reading the book and being in headspace for a bit, like, I really do get the sense of like, probably going to be pretty uncomfortable public speaking. Most people are. That's not like a slight or anything. But I will say I was surprised at first at how comfortable he seems, given how uncomfortable the book made him come across, you know?
How much of this do I need to address personally? When is it important that I actually respond to an interview request? How much of it can I just ignore and just go along with my day? And actually, yes, keep sitting at my drawing desk and keep making do work instead of just answering questions, often maybe the same questions kind of over and over about, you know, a book that I'm really proud of, but at this point came out like over 3 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, super fair. And that also makes me feel a lot less bad about not reaching out for an interview myself. Like, oh, you do this a lot anyway, and probably going to get a lot of the same questions. There might be one or two that I would have that would be unique, but I couldn't expect it necessarily more than that. And, you know, working on other stuff. Why rehash this 3-year-old or 4-year-old book now so often?
The main thing has been, is thinking about how it affects my schedule and how it affects my time, and whether or when do I not need to speak to it.
Absolutely. I think it's a critical piece, because in a certain sense you're doing the promotion of a work by saying this is a thing that I'm proud of and this is what people need to know, but then also you're an artist, not a marketer, right?
Yeah. Yes, my publisher has a publicity team, and that's their job, not mine.
Yeah, true.
And that's the way it should be.
Yes.
So I think the next thing that kind of comes up for me is that we've recently got some great news out of the courts in Virginia.
Yes.
So I wanted to bring that up. Genderqueer was considered not obscene, and actually parts of the obscenity law in Virginia were struck down based on...
I did not know that. That's interesting.
Yeah, if people aren't... I didn't follow that. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Like, one, legally established as not obscene. Also, those rules were dumb in the first place. Pretty important in this discussion. It's another... I'm glad we're watching this. It's great to know now, like, no, legally it has been determined to be not obscene. If you want to claim it is, that's your problem.
It is very exciting, and I'm really glad. Yes, a lawsuit was brought by a Republican from Virginia who was a congressional candidate, but who actually did not.
Oh, in case people don't know, there are still obscenity laws on the books in a lot of states. Often they're not enforced, but as you can see, they can be, and they will be in cases where there's ideological, fervor. So, this Republican wants to, make a show of it, and he's probably had the thought of, how much of a hero will I be if I get this book declared legally obscene and subject to obscenity laws and all this stuff, and then ended up working out for the better instead.
Win his congressional bid in the primaries in this past summer, he actually specifically sued a Barnes & Noble location for carrying Genderqueer and another book, a het fairy tale fantasy romance by Sarah J. Maas, and claiming that the books were obscene for minors. And I think that the goal was, or at least what he stated was, that he wanted them to be like, you would have to, I guess, show ID maybe to buy them. Be over 18
like buying
or
cigarettes.
Yeah.
Now that said, there are a lot of books that are inappropriate for younger kids for younger people that don't require an ID. As I said, I read Haunted when I was under 18. I checked it out from. Oh, I guess I didn't mention I was under 18. I checked it out from a public library. Same thing with Fight Club. I read both of these in high school, and didn't need an ID. And if it did, I wouldn't have been able to read it. I think I read Lullaby and Diary also while I was in high school. So I read a lot of these before I was 18. And Choke. I read Choke as well in high school. I was a big Palahniuk fan for a while. And I read most of these before I was 18. I didn't need an ID for it. Why should this book need it? What's different about this one? And of course, in what section of the library or bookstore is this book placed? I would assume. Well, with Genderqueer, it'd probably be in like whatever section has memoirs and autobiographies, right? Because that's what it is. It's just a graphic or a graphic memoir. So I would assume that's where it's going. I don't see why it would go anywhere else. Like if it's in the like young adult section, okay, maybe it should be moved. That would be my argument. Not it should be like declared obscene and require ID, right? So not in the teen section. I don't know. But even if it were in the teen section, I don't think that would merit trying to enforce obscenity laws and require an ID to check out or purchase this book. That wouldn't make any sense. Instead, you might want to maybe there'd be some mechanism of enforcement of like this should be. I don't even know if a mechanism of enforcement is appropriate. It's a bookstore. Can they like? At what level is the state allowed to tell them how to organize their books? I don't know. Like if they wanted to have a nonfiction section that included like the works of Tolkien, is that like a legal issue? I don't really know. But it would at most be like, hey, this should probably be at a different section of the store. Not we should need to crack down with obscenity laws and require an ID to purchase this book. Right? I understand that there's a distinction between the issue being taken and the level of response is just disproportionate.
Anyway,
even if it's in the teen section, which we don't know that it is, right? It might have just been in the nonfiction, autobiography section, or very possibly at a display at the front because it is a bright, colorful, cover and. It's very interesting, and maybe they even have like an LGBT spotlight. It might just be in the LGBT section. Some stores have that. There's a lot of places it could be, but even if it's in the teen section, does the response feel appropriate? I don't think so.
But yes, the judge on August 30th dismissed the case on due process issues and also, struck down part of the law that the case was based on in Virginia as being unconstitutional and violating the First Amendment. So.
Oh, okay. Well, if it's struck down on due process issues, then I guess it's not declared not obscene. All right. I'm not gonna try to say that if I ever get into an argument about this with somebody. Yeah, I guess I wouldn't say it was declared not obscene if it was struck down on due process issues. That's just like. It never like reached a terminus as it were, but while they were at it, they did overturn some of those obscenity laws, which is great.
Really exciting. Well, in the end, the lawsuit I think maybe changed the law for the better.
Yeah.
So
I would agree.
That's
a win.
So take that. Well, now that we've addressed the elephant in the room, let's talk about something that's a little more fun, shall we?
Yeah.
All right. So the first thing I wanted to let's see if I can get this slide presentation to work. The first thing I wanted to talk about in terms of the book Genderqueer is how deeply personal and heartfelt it is, and what it means to really, I guess, lay it all out there as an artist when you're making something. It's kind of a debut graphic novel. It's like, but it's also a very intense personal statement. I wonder, how did you approach that initially?
It's
Yeah, I
interesting to
mean,
see too what images from the book the SPX were interested in putting up. It's not for any like positive or negative reason, just interesting to see what other people found interesting about it. Like there was that we had one earlier where it was, some people live in the forest, in the mountains, some people live by the sea, and I'm kind of in that jungle in between, or whatever, or I want to live in that jungle in between. It was a really good shot. I liked that. It just wasn't one I noted. I think very. I don't think I noted it particularly much. Or this one, which is a great a great shot, not for I think the the graphics, but I think for the mind space. That this Nautilus shell, the depiction of the Nautilus shell with all these cascading thoughts that lead into the next one, and like really puts you in the mind space or whatever. It's not as visually dynamic, but it is, I think, emotionally dynamic. And so it's interesting that they found that they wanted to put this up. It spoke to them, or they thought it was relevant to put up for whatever reason. But it is a good page.
this book is very interwoven with my own process of coming out, and this is a book that, in the writing of it, was very cathartic and very useful and healing, and it, like, the writing of it helped me reach conclusions that I don't know that I would have reached had I not spent so much time sitting over drafts and thinking
Well, that's
about.
great. But that's also that's a super common thing. How often have you been talking about something out loud and came to a conclusion because you were talking about it that thinking about it you wouldn't have? This happens constantly. It's something I notice actually when I play a lot of strategic games is if I think out loud, I'll come to better decisions, better strategies than if I don't do that. Uh, it's kind of an interesting thing of like when you express the concept, when you express these ideas, you'll reach deeper and more well thought out conclusions than just thinking it. It's an interesting dynamic.
Trying to, what am I trying to say in like the clearest, most concise form? And so I found the process of writing it extremely like personally useful. But there was also like a long time. So I am in my early 30s, and when I was a teenager in the early 2000s, there was so much less representation of trans and non-binary stories,
Very true,
stories in media, and I.
It's one of the benefits of the modern age. Like, people do talk about it, but like you have people a lot younger understanding themselves a lot better because there is so much more discussion on this because there's less repression of trans stories, queer stories, so on and so forth. Actually, you know what? I think I want to mess with this a little bit. Just hopefully you can see this better. I'm gonna put it in theater mode. Yeah, I think that looks a lot better. All right, all right. I forgot I wanted to do that going forward because I forgot about this new layout that we're working with. Hopefully this is better for everybody.
Out gay, bi, and lesbian adults and older students, but I didn't meet someone who
The
was
value of
out as trans or
representation, right?
non-binary until I was in grad school. So as a teenager, I really had no model for that. I had no role model for that. I didn't even really hear the word non-binary until I was probably in my 20s, and so.
Oh, thanks, Kim.
I like. There were then when I sort of finally did learn that word. There were many years where I was like, I think the idea of like coming out and being known and like telling people about like how
Yeah, there are stages, right? Like you have to know about the thing, then you have to praise the thing, then you have to ask like, does this describe me? You have to first hear it, then understand it, then apply it to yourself, then decide like how as he's saying, how out you're going to be, so on and so forth. And I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff I'm skipping too, but this is the case for all sorts of things. So the earlier someone knows about it, the less confused they have to be about themselves, the better they can understand themselves. Just like it was in the book of, years of confusion and not understanding, like, and feeling like he's different from everybody else, even though, this is or like there's something wrong with him. But no, there isn't. Just didn't understand yet what was going on, and like didn't understand himself.
what my true like feelings about gender are, is scarier, and the scariness outweighs like my desire to be known. And it was that I use a metaphor of a scale in here for gender, but there's another scale metaphor which is like which do I want more? To be seen and recognized, or to be like, or to not like speak up, or like, to like, do I want to be vulnerable, or do I want to be known, or do I want to feel safe?
It sucks.
But
That's
not
kind of a choice
recognized?
you
And
have to
these
make,
sort of like weighing of these questions for a long time. The like fear of coming out weighed heavier than the desire to be known. And at some point that shifted, and I was like, no, even though it's scary, I actually do want people to like recognize who I am and know who I am and know where I'm coming from when I talk about myself. And I think a tipping point was really realizing how moving through a world in which people were reading my gender as one way, feminine, when that's not how I was reading myself or understanding myself, was really damaging a lot of my relationships, from like friendships to potential like romantic relationships. And it was like that mismatch of like not being seen as the way that I saw myself, which leading to like miscommunications and just like misunderstandings. And it just made being in relation to people harder. And I was like, I want to be able to like know people and be known by people in a like deep and authentic way. So I think I'm gonna have to like come out about all of this. And because I'm a writer and an author and a cartoonist, one of the ways that I did that is by writing and drawing cartoons about it. So
absolutely. Yeah, at least now there's not that. Well, I have to go to everybody individually. This is a very well known story. Everyone should be at the very least aware, if not of the specifics of like the general like, oh okay, like not necessarily the gender you were assigned at birth. All right, at least that part you don't have to deal with every person. Hopefully.
Kind of started as these black and white Instagram comics titled Genderqueer,
yes.
I think. Could you tell us a little bit about how you decided to use Instagram as a platform, and like what made you decide to like, this is the project that I'm going to just serialize on Red Gold Sparks, or like?
This is not from the book. Asexuality. Sometimes I wonder, is my asexuality an attribute or a deficit, an absence or a presence? Yeah, that's kind of interesting.
I think you have a slide of one of the earliest ones.
Yes, I do.
If you click,
find
through it.
Yes.
So yeah, this was one of the early series. Really, what it was is when I sat down to start trying to write about like gender and gender identity, it felt very hard to write like the big picture. Like, here's what I mean when I'm talking about gender. It's a big topic, and it was this almost feeling like, well, maybe if I just write all of these little tiny comics that aren't trying to address the whole thing, but just one moment, one gendered moment, one memory, one interaction.
That, to me, sounds like very much the thought, like how an artist thinks about the world. And I think, I mean that in a positive way. It feels very much the like wanting to capture even just some small element of a human experience, and asking like, even that's too big. How do I capture this small section? And so much art, I think, is doing exactly that. Yeah, very much like the true artist's way of thinking. Not to like, I'm not trying to like denigrate people who don't think like that as not being true artists. I just mean like that sounds like a very authentically artistic outlook that a philosopher doesn't necessarily have, or an engineer or whatever else.
One thought.
So it's that approach to the world.
It was this feeling of like, well, maybe if I draw enough individual little things, when I collect them all together, the bigger picture will start to emerge. And I felt in some way that I was like trying to like assemble a jigsaw puzzle, but I'd lost the top of the box, so I didn't know what the picture was, and I was like,
oh yeah, for me, it seems a little bit like the analogy I had thought of was kind of like that. I'm sure everyone knows that enormous painting was in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. It was like a day at the park or whatever, but it's comprised exclusively of dots of ink. But when you step back, you can see, and it's like making this section of it, this little section, and then this other little section. But when you do it all, eventually the whole landscape becomes clear. Seems like we're talking about similar things, but I don't know. I find that an interesting approach.
Like, maybe if I just create and piece together enough little things, like the bigger picture will start to emerge. And I was very influenced by a lot of other memoir cartoonists who draw in like a more simple or stripped down style. James Kachalka of American Elf, you can see I pretty much just ripped off the format that he uses with like a title at the top and the panels. And then Lucy Nisley and Erica Moen and of course Alison Bechdel and like a lot of other cartoonists who kind of drew in like a very sort of simplified small character kind of style, is like drawing on all of those influences. And I didn't choose Instagram because I love Instagram, that's for sure. It was more, there was a year I started drawing these, which was 2016. I sat down when I finally was like, okay, I'm going to write about gender. And there's an anecdote at the beginning of this book where I was challenged to write about gender in like one of the very first classes I ever took in grad school, and I was like, absolutely not, no, thank you.
And if you recall, it's also like I thought this was the last time I was going to write anything autobiographical in comic form, and as we're reading a graphic memoir,
About 3 years after that, I was like, okay, I think it's time. I think we have to go back there, reopen that box. When I sat down to start writing it, they just like came flooding out. I drew like 60 of these little strips in like 2 weeks. And I was like,
goodness.
oh, I have a lot to say about this.
I'm not surprised.
But of course, when I first drew them, I was like, oh, these are like wretchedly personal. And I was like, I don't know if anyone can see these. And I had to first show them to like a slightly like widening circle of like very like my sibling and my best friend, and then like a slightly wider circle of friends from grad school, and then other artists and writers that I really trusted, to be like, are these good? Like, first of all, are they working on the level of like narrative and illustration? And then also, do they change how you feel about me as a person? And then at each level that I would share them, I would get like, a wave of like love and support and feedback. And then each time I got like a good response, that sort of gave me more courage to share them more widely. And then I was like, well, I want to use these comics as a tool to like come out to my community, my professional community, which is cartoonists, people who are here, people in the audience, people who are tabling upstairs. And so I used the Inktober challenge in 2016.
This is completely off topic, but I was noticing it. How good is the swoop in Air Hair right now? It's so good. It just looks good. All right, nailing it. Great, fantastic hair day. All right, moving on.
And I was like, I'm just going to post one a day. And because I am like forcing myself to post one a day, it means I can't like skip one of the ones that feels a little bit closer to home. But I do remember there was at least one comic that I posted at like 2 in the morning, because I was like, maybe if I post it in the middle of the night, no one will read it, which is not how the internet
No,
works.
that's not the internet at all.
But it was, it was one that just felt a little bit like, oh God, am I really posting this? But so I think the one a day kind of did help me at least be like, okay, you just have to release them, like get over your nervousness.
Yeah, the schedule helps.
So that was kind
of
why I chose that venue. Was just really, it was convenience, and that was where a lot of my professional community was. So I was like, okay, if I post them here, a lot of people who make comics will see them, and they'll do what I needed to do, which is to help me like kind of come out professionally.
Absolutely. I think the whole world on Instagram and social media has become so convoluted and kind of gross over the last at least the last year or two that it's one of those things I just like. Do I have to be on this platform?
What's actually pretty great is Tumblr.com.
Yeah,
Anyone else here use Tumblr.com?
As I understand, I'm not one very much for social media in general, but as I understand it, yes, Tumblr is very. There's a large queer community, as I understand it, on Tumblr. It's kind of what they're known for. But I'm glad he's enjoying it.
An active Tumblr.
I still have an active Tumblr. I have maintained an active Tumblr since 2011, so I can't leave now. I live there. Anyway, honestly, in my opinion, Tumblr is the best social media for posting long-form comics.
Yes, I agree.
Because you can post images in a vertical scroll, and it's way better than, in my opinion, than the little 10 slides. There's still a 10 image limit, but since you can post them like larger format, and it's easier to post links in the text of the post, and I don't need to be advertising a website. Anyway, I'm just saying that Tumblr is better than Instagram, and everybody should come back to Tumblr.
I agree.
Yeah.
This has the Field Mouse Press stamp of approval.
Yeah.
It's just so hard to really connect with people, and I think that's. I wanted to bring the idea of social media and connecting up, because I think that one of the things that I think genderqueer does so well is connects your personal lived story to a broader audience. People that
definitely agree. Remember, we were mentioning that repeatedly, is from the outside being able to understand the experience very well that isn't our own, Maia's experience in particular, and very good at like helping understand. And I wonder if I'll mention it, but like to me, something that stood out was that it helps bring you in to Air Headspace, so you understand, but then starts distancing again, so that by the end you're looking at this person more as a person that you'll encounter, and not one whose head you get to live within. And so when you see things come up for the first time uh, in conversation and not in thoughts, you understand the kind of thing that led to that. But this is what it will more closely resemble when you encounter just another person who you also don't get to know. You also don't get to know the thoughts of. I think it's great at like helping understand and then putting it back into the context of you're just gonna see someone and they're gonna say, "Hey, I'm non-binary. These are my pronouns." And even without, and you can understand that there is an internal world and a person who has reasons and feelings that lead to this without without needing to know what those are, and understanding that the expectation that you should need to know isn't really reasonable. At the very least, that's something I got out of it, and I think the book did a really good job of encouraging me into that realization, even if it was unintended. But definitely agree. I think it's a very good, very good book at getting people into understanding where non-binary people and trans people and other people who are having um, who have whose gender experience is not identical to a cis person's, to help understand that a bit.
Ability or understanding of non-binary gender or even transgender or even those questions about like who am I, where is my place in the world,
And those questions of who am I think are also done really well in the sense that it you can look at that and go, I've asked questions like this, even if it's about a different aspect of myself, which can help a person like this isn't alien or foreign, it's just a different avenue of self-examination. We've all done it. I can understand that concept and that process, and now I only need to understand these specifics, and it's good at helping understand those specifics.
And I was wondering, what what has I mean, besides all the legal challenges and all that garbage, what has the response been in terms of other queer people coming to you and saying your book helped me understand, or what kind of reactions have you had in that way?
So many and so powerful. Before I was drawing these little black and white comics and posting them, I'd been working on a long fantasy web series webcomic series that literally never gained any traction whatsoever. And when I first started posting these comics that I like suddenly actually started getting like reader responses for like the first time, and people would leave comments on them, things like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know there was like a word for this, or oh my gosh, I thought I was the only person in the world who felt this way.
And that comes out in the book too, and like that's that's one of the major things of value in the book. Oh, whoops!
Like
didn't
reading this makes me feel less alone, and then I started to have a lot of people come out to me, including people that people I'd known for years, like friends from like elementary school and like high school, who I never would have guessed from just looking at them and the way they presented themselves in the world were questioning their gender, but they would read the comics and then they'd maybe, DM me or something and say like, hey, I really relate to the stuff you've been posting, and actually I've really been wrestling this as well. And that was like, felt like such an honor that people would then like trust me with that, when clearly it was something they were not like super out about publicly. And that meant a lot.
And I hope that's shown. I hope that makes clear the value that books like this have, and any art like this can have, is it's affecting people's lives. I'm sure Maya understands this certainly, but I hope it was encouraging as well.
And then of course once the book has come out, I've had so many readers reach out and say that it's meant a lot to them, saying things like, like if it's a young person saying like, I gave this to my parents and they're now like better at using my pronouns, or the reverse, like a parent saying like, thank you so much for this, I feel like I understand my child better, or my partner or my friend or whatever it is. And partly because I did write the book in huge part because, like, as in a certain sense, like a letter to my own parents and my own extended family, and wanting to connect and explain to them. So whenever people say that it like opened up those conversations in their family, that specifically means like really a lot to me.
That's good. Yeah. I think that's one of those things where I think part of the joy that I have with your book is it's approaching some really complicated and difficult ideas about personhood and self and the way we interact with the world, and you do it in such a kind of like just an open and clean way. And when I mean clean,
Another minor nitpick. Holy crap! The interviewer's questions are way too long. They're just all so long. He's talking for like a minute, and before he gets to a question, I'm like, okay, what are we talking about? You lose the beginning before you get to the end.
So clear and understandable.
Maybe I'm just a
like
goldfish.
The questions you're asking are hard, but the way you ask them makes it easy to empathize and to come to an understanding. I think that's one of the strengths of your work.
Thank you for saying that.
But I also, well, I'm going to skip this one, but I also think your short fiction and science fiction is actually quite good too.
Thank you.
So Maia, this was in these images are from a collection that was in Spike Trotman's.
Yes, it's the Faster Than Light, y'all anthology that came out from Iron Circus Comics a couple of years ago. This is actually the longest.
Another work, I guess?
True? Yeah, the longest fiction comic that I've had yet published. It's 20 pages. I have it up on my table upstairs, nice. Wall 80. Come visit me later. And I'm really proud of it. Yeah, it's
goddamn
a story
cute is he? Goddamn.
About two queer teens in high school trying to build
I appreciate
like a little
I appreciate when people
together.
are adorable. Right?
And one of them's non-binary and their teacher's also non-binary, but it's really about like sort of like science and exploration and like how ambitious of a project do you try to build when you're like, like 17 years old or whatever. And I'm really happy. I'm really happy with it. And I love genre books. I love sci-fi and fantasy. It's probably what I read the most of, and I really, really want to publish more fiction work. My next book is fiction, but it's still contemporary. But I really want to. I really want to draw my book with like dragons and spaceships in it here at some point. We're gonna get there. Yeah.
Eventually.
Yeah. Eventually.
I mean, given the interest in fantasy displayed in the book, yeah, I'm not surprised. There's like, yeah, I want to draw dragons and spaceships and stuff. Which also just, I mean, if I could drawing dragons and spaceships sounds like a fun thing to draw. But I'm not surprised at all. There was a lot of interest in fantasy displayed in the book.
Excited to read that.
Yeah.
Speaking of this new book, is there anything you'd like to tell the audience about what's on your plate right now?
Yeah. So my next book is still untitled. This one was easy to title. But I in general don't feel like I'm that good at titling things. I just call it literally like whatever the most basic thing that it is what it says on the tin. Anyway, so I don't know what the title of the next one is, but we're in the mid-process of selling it. It's pretty far along. I have a full script. I have a full thumbnail draft. It's currently 215 pages. That'll probably grow a little bit in the editorial process. It is fiction, contemporary. It is for a younger audience. It's sort of like middle grade or young YA, and it was written.
I'd like to note that is something he feels like is important to mention. If that were the assumption with the other books, like with genderqueer, might not he might not feel that that's necessary to say. Just like, oh, you like the other stuff. Another implication, like, this might not have been intended for younger audiences necessarily, but it's being treated like it's being, taught in schools to third graders, like as part of the curriculum, which is not. Like, I still can't get over that it was banned in local libraries, and people are going to pretend like it has anything to do with the contents of the book or anything to do with the graphic nature or being inappropriate for kids.
Mostly based on like feedback I received when genderqueer first came out from parents who would say, like, I read this and it was so useful, but my non-conforming child is like 12 or 10 or 8 or 6, a little too young for this book.
Oh, so like there's an awareness also that this seems pretty clear. Yeah, I'm getting the sense more and more that genderqueer was never intended for younger audiences. Is that clear at this point? Like, even getting feedback from parents who are reading it, who are saying like, oh yeah, obviously it's not. And so the idea is, hey, can there, do you have any interest in making a book that would be aimed at younger audiences who could benefit from the messages in genderqueer? Yeah, I don't think it was intended for kids.
Parents asked me, would you ever make an all ages version of genderqueer? And I was like, I don't want to abridge my memoir.
Yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, that seems pretty conclusive. He was asked about making an all ages version. and prefers not to abridge. Yeah, fair. You know what? Fair is your memoir. You don't have to abridge. But then that's obviously with an understanding that it's not for people and not for younger kids. It's not for teenagers or younger. It's for adults. So why is it banned in schools? There are lots of books that are for adults. No one's ever said this was for kids. Why is it being banned? Well, we know why now.
Feels weird. I don't want to do that. But I could write a new book that hopefully is addressing what you're asking me, which is I want a book about gender and identity and sexuality, but that is appropriate for a younger reader. So that's kind of like what inspired me to want to work on the book. And yeah, it's about a kiddo who's in junior high, 11 when the book starts, 12 by the end of the book, and there's like gets their period, and there's like the first sex ed classes and like some like friendship stuff and like dating and peer pressure and coming of age and all those good things from the morass that is junior high.
Yeah.
Those horrible years.
Morass is definitely the best word.
Yeah. Just gonna wallow in those feelings while I draw this book for the next like 2 years. Yeah.
I think that's I think I think that strikes true for a lot of people in the audience. Junior high.
Woof. Yeah.
Woof is right.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't think you could pay me enough. Like it'd be like $1 million to go back and live through 6th and 7th grade again. I'd be like.
No, I don't think I could pick you up on that.
I don't know. I think it'd be neat, but I obviously didn't have the same difficulties that Maia did.
And fiction and your interaction with other media, I think is a really critical piece to bring up too, because one of the things that I really notice in genderqueer is the way that you engage with other media throughout this book, and it really just shows, I think, your love for other art and the way that
that is really clear. We didn't mention that, but that is very clear.
There's this huge section, not huge,
and that includes like we see the music here, and that's the obvious part, but then also literature. Not just literature, I guess any sort of reading, because there was a lot of nonfiction he said he read. But also like fashion, we're super interested in like figure skating and recreating the outfits, and towards the end, better, trying to better express himself, and lots of different artistic modes that he seems to like.
In the middle, about your love for genre fiction and David Bowie and various types of music.
Queer YA.
Yes,
boy bands. Yes.
Yeah. And so I wanted to kind of get at that question. It's like, how does your engagement with other arts like inform your practice?
So much. I mean, I love reading and I love music, and both of them that's like what I'm just pouring into my brain, like in all waking hours when I'm not pouring some stories out, I'm pouring stories in. I mean, I think the reason that I wanted to become an author is because when I was like in high school and I was reading tons of different like fantasy and YA novels, I noticed that a bunch of my favorite authors all seemed to thank each other in the acknowledgments, and sometimes they were each other's editors, and sometimes they were married to each other. And I was like, it seems like authors know other authors. And if I want to befriend my favorite authors, I think maybe if I become an author, that will be the quickest way.
That's very funny.
And so literally before
It reminds me a little bit of, I don't know if it's a real story, but allegedly Rob Zombie was like, well, I want to be a rock star, but, it's hard to break into music. So the easier way to do it is to make like cult favorite horror movies to get famous, then I can start doing music. I don't know if that's true, but it seems similar of like, let's do this other thing that isn't like a small thing, but like it's the means to an end. But even though it feels to most people like an accomplishment of itself, like being a filmmaker, being an author, but it's like, well, I did that because I want to meet my favorite authors. I like it.
Knew I had anything to say or even had a story that I felt worth telling, I was like, I want to become an author because I want in on that author friendship stuff that's going on. So like that was like the impulse, was like this desire to like enter the literary space, because I just wanted to like talk to people and hang with people and know people who are writing books. And yeah, so there is a whole section here about like finding like the queer section of my local library, and like how unbelievably like desperate I was for queer stories as a teenager. I would read anything. I was like hungry for the tiniest crumbs, and it's so amazing like now as an adult to be like, there are like just so many more queer books than there used to be, and I am devouring them. And then also music. So
and also
both
contributing
my
to
parents
that
do
canon.
love music a lot. My dad was a radio host through all of his
Oh,
college
that's neat.
years. Hilariously, he was at San Luis Obispo the same years as Weird Al Yankovic, and
Huh.
they both worked in the college radio. They overlapped for a couple of semesters, and they had like back-to-back segments where like my dad's radio name was Babylon Bill, and it was like Weird Al and Babylon Bill, and it's like someone
That's neat.
at the college like digitized those years, probably because Weird Al went on to become famous. So at one point he was able to find in this like internet archive like these like clips from when he was a radio host as like a college student, and he played some for me, and I was like, this is wild.
That's pretty cool.
So anyway, he loves music. He plays many instruments, and during his time at the radio, he just made a whole bunch of like he would copy the albums they got in for the radio station, and he would just copy them onto cassette tapes, and he had all these tapes and records and all of these things. So like our house was just like full of all this bootleg music when I was a kid. So I got introduced to David Bowie. The story's in here through like a bootleg cassette tape that my dad had like dubbed, and he had also, it was mostly the Changes album by David Bowie, but there was at least one song on there that he didn't like, so he just swapped it out for like a song from Ziggy Stardust. So the album that I listened to as a teen was this like homemade album that like I love the set list of it so good, like, and it's like, you know how you like anticipate the song that like
Oh
the
yeah.
album, like what song.
I don't know if this is a phenomenon that still happens with newer generations, because now like everything's on Spotify or YouTube, or like you have access to albums aren't necessarily as codified as they used to be. But like that exact feeling of like you've listened to this album so many times that when you hear this song ends, you have this like anticipation of like, here's the lead into the next song, and like the little quirks and stuff. Also, something I noticed is the difference between it's like this little micro difference is like if you listen to an album on something like Spotify, you don't have the same break between songs as you did when you would listen to it on a CD, or I assume the same is true in like record or whatever, maybe not, where because the CD has to like change tracks real quick, there's like a different kind of pause. Or no, sorry, the CD is more seamless if I remember right. Whereas like on Spotify you might get a break, but I remember we talked about this when we were reading the book, like Hybrid Theory, an album I know intricately well. There's one song where it holds a chord from the end of one song into the beginning of the next, which works really well on the CD, where it's seamless and it just feels like the next song picks up immediately. But if you listen to it like on YouTube is a better example, those are two different songs. You have to wait for the page to load. It feels very different, and there's this weird beginning, like end of a chord at the beginning of the next song. It's a very different feel. I wonder a bit if that experience is diminishing with younger people, where you don't really have like, maybe do younger people listen to albums in the same way? I don't know. Maybe if someone like is a youths is one of the youths in the chat, please let me know if that's still a thing. But yeah, just mentioning that, it's like, oh, I know what you're talking about.
Comes after the next song, and you're like, yes.
Oh, you might have also had this in other circumstances. I had this while working retail for a bit, because I was working at a Halloween store, and so they play the same 20 songs, and that's the thing that's on loop the whole day. And so you hear the Monster Mash, and you're like, okay, after this is like Thriller or whatever, and you just expect the next thing. So maybe you get it in different ways, but I wonder if it's still the same thing with like albums.
This transition from the end of of like this song into the next one is like so good, and so like I can't reproduce that, because I guess I could like,
you could maybe try to find it
Spotify maybe, but I don't know,
or maybe try to find the cassette.
Anyway,
it definitely wouldn't be the same, because
yeah,
of the difference in like transition. It doesn't transition the same way from in like cassette form as it does on Spotify.
So tons of like music getting into my life through that method, and also of course because I spend a ton of my time just like drawing. I have so many hours in the day to listen to things. So I listen
Oh,
to tons
yeah.
of audiobooks, I listen to tons of podcasts, and I listen to a lot of music while I'm working. And so of course it like bleeds into my work because it's what's like
Oh yeah,
coming
of
in
course.
to my
Inspiration.
brain while other things are coming out of my brain. Like,
Yeah.
of course it's going to come like a soup. Yeah.
Of course. Well,
Of
you know,
course.
it's like
Yeah, but people like soup.
I always think about creativity kind of like as a pitcher full of water, right? Like what you put into the pitcher is what you're going to pour out.
Of course, naturally. Yeah.
Wonderful.
And I like that. I like that metaphor also because when you pour something into a pitcher, it mixes together before it pours out. You know, if you have, I don't know, like fruit punch and then you pour in some tea, you don't just pour out the tea, you pour out fruit punch tea mixture. That's how you get Arnold Palmers and things like that. You know, that's a good metaphor because yeah, you don't pour out the exact same thing. It all gets mixed together before you pour out a little bit of it.
Yeah. I think this is a perfect time to talk about K-pop.
Oh, yes.
K-pop? Are we talking about K-pop? Why are we talking about K-pop? We're talking about K-pop?
Let me see if I can advance the slide.
Yeah.
K-pop in the time of COVID. Tell me about how. So I have to admit, I was a K-pop novice, and then
I don't know anything about K-pop.
To see if I would be the moderator for this panel. And
Oh, okay. It's another
Yeah, and you
another
asked me for
comic.
some playlists.
I did, and
I
I'm
was very-
obsessed.
Yes.
So I'm like,
I've infected someone.
it is a disease I will gladly carry for the rest of my life. I'm a carrier, probably transmissible. So I think one of the things I wanted
That's what we need the real social distancing for, is to prevent the spread of K-pop.
to ask is like, where did this
We have
get
to
started?
flatten the curve.
And then also like, I think everybody has a story, right? Like we're 3 years.
Wonder if
into
there's a
this
vaccine in the works.
pandemic, right?
Yes.
And we're here at Small Press Expo in person for the first time since the COVID pandemic hit. And I am just like bubbling up with joy and to be in a same room with people that do something that I really love and care about. I think everybody has a story of how they survived.
Like how did you get through? What was it that got you through?
So
yes.
I wanted to kind of hear about that from you because it sounds like K-pop
was a big part of it. A big part of it. Yeah, so people who've read the book know that I had a pretty intense One Direction phase. The band went on hiatus in 2016.
Aren't they broken up? I don't actually know.
By 2017, I was like, I need something to be obsessed with. Like, I haven't had something to be obsessed with for like a year. I'm dying. Give me something. I must hyperfixate. And just at that moment, a friend entered my life and who was already into K-pop, and we were talking about like music and pop music, and she was like, do you want to watch some K-pop music videos? It sounds like that might be up your alley. And I was like, yeah. And so she showed me a couple of music videos. The very first one ever was EXO's Coco Bop. If anyone has seen it, it's like a trippy, brightly colored, like
should we watch it? I
acid
don't think we're
trip
gonna
of
watch
music video. Chef's kiss. So good. And I was like, I'm obsessed already. Tell me everything. So that was in like late 2017. And so for quite a long time, that was the only K-pop group that I know and was into. And then when I ended up signing my book deal in January of 2018, I listened almost exclusively to K-pop while drawing genderqueer. And part of that is because it's really useful for me to be into music that is not in English because I can listen to it while I'm writing and while I'm thumbnailing, whereas I cannot listen to music.
I've had the exact same experience. It's kind of interesting. So when I was when when he started that sentence, I was like, wait, is this going where I think it's going? I've had that exact same experience. People thought it was so weird because when I code, I listen to like a lot of electronic music that's kind of high energy, which is surprising to people because a lot of programmers will listen to like lo-fi, chill beats, like kind of a lower energy stuff. But the reason why I do is in part like it keeps my motivation going to have that energy, but also it tends to be really low on lyrics, which means I don't get distracted by the content as much. But for me it's a little different. Some amount of lyrics means that like when I like ADD space out and like my mind drifts a little bit, I have a little something to latch onto. But then those lyrics stop pretty quickly, and I can go back to what I'm working on. It's kind of an interesting phenomenon. Like, I don't know. It's neat to hear that somebody else has a similar experience, though not quite the same. Seems like Oh, maybe the lyrics in another language is similar to the small amount of English lyrics that I like. Makes sense. This way you're not distracted. Yeah, exactly. It's like you allow your like for me, I allow myself the small distraction of like maybe for like 10 15 seconds I'll get caught up in the music instead of what I'm working on. But the lyrics don't last very long. My brain won't have that much to latch onto, and so I can shift back to programming. It seems this might be a little bit similar. The like lyrics in another language don't usually have the same effect with me because I I don't know, like not understanding it does get in the way for me sometimes, and it's still lyrics. I still do try to like um try to know what they are. I don't know how to explain it. Um, it's kind of interesting to have like at least a similar relationship with music while working.
Music with English lyrics while I'm writing and thumbnailing because the words interfere with the words that I am trying to work with.
Okay,
But
some
it
amount of
can.
that is
So I
similar.
also do listen to some Japanese music and like Gaelic music and like folk music and like Enya.
I'd like to hear more Gaelic music. The little I've heard sounds really pretty, and I mean, it's just one of those like not knowing where to start, or and you know, in any grouping of anything, you know, you're gonna like some things and not other things. Um, I hadn't really thought it like I'd heard very little, but Gaelic music sounds very pretty. The amount I've heard.
Like anything that like, or I can't understand the lyrics is actually really great while I'm working. So I was like, this is great. It's this like poppy, upbeat, very bright, like you know, quick tempo music that I can like put on this playlist and be like, yes, I'm like jazzed to sit here and draw, but also like none of these words are distracting me, and I'm just gonna like draw, 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 draw. So like it was so great while I was working on this book. And then, I was like, I would say a casual fan. I would watch music videos and I would like listen to the music and I had some playlists, but I didn't like really know I didn't really know about the industry and I wasn't like learning all these members' names or I wasn't like watching interviews or anything. And then
This is an aspect of fandom that I always found kind of interesting when I learned about. I had a similar like, oh, am I weird? Because like I never did this. For me, it was always about like the end result. Like I listened to Hybrid Theory for hours and hours and hours and hours, probably over 100 hours in my lifetime. That's probably uh, a vastly conservative estimate. But I never thought to look into who the band was. That just was not of interest to me. Maybe it was weird. Maybe I'm weird, but like the people behind it wasn't as important as like the result. I'm more interested in the music or the ideas than the people behind it. Again, maybe that's weird. And in some cases, it's detrimental. I know because sometimes you need to know a little bit about the author to understand the work. This I found more the case uh, for more narrative mediums, but it's not always the case. You know, there's a lot of that stuff. Yeah, I don't know. I know that's like a thing in fandom of like, you know, you go to the message boards and you do in forums and whatever, and you talk about it and you like you look into the stories of the people who made it. None of that has ever been interesting to me, and I don't know. Maybe I'm built different. Who knows?
and pandemic.
Yeah.
And as you know, we all experienced this. Everything that was on our calendars got canceled, and there was like nothing going on. And I was like, what do I look forward to? What's going to bring me joy? And the K-pop industry, most K-pop groups are managed by a company that does a lot of the production work. Some groups write their own lyrics and music, some groups don't. But the release schedule is much more intense than what is normal for a Western or non-Korean group. They often release between 1 and 3 albums a year. And that means every album is going to have a music video or a series of music videos and like a whole, you know, the whole release package, promo photos, interviews, et cetera, et cetera.
That sounds like a lot, in particular if like you're making the music. But one thing to keep in mind is with things like this, there's probably a huge production team, and this gets a lot easier when you know you have 10 people who are writing songs year round that are not in the band. Some number of people are like are planning out the music video and doing the direction or whatever. You know, the actual people in the band are, you know, have to learn the songs and perform and whatever else, and that is a lot of work. Don't get me wrong, but it becomes a lot easier the more that work gets split up, and a lot of it probably is, almost certainly, right? I don't imagine that K-pop bands are writing their own music. Maybe sometimes, maybe a little bit. But for the most part, I'm guessing it's other people writing it.
So it was really great
and doing a lot of the
in
other
those
stuff.
years where there was nothing on the calendar to be like, oh, what I can be excited about is that one of my favorite groups is putting out an album this month. So like on the 15th, I'll get like a new album and there'll be a music video and there'll probably be like a countdown to the release, and maybe me and a couple friends will actually like get on a call together so we can like watch it at the same time.
And this is
And
probably
like,
why they do this. What's being described right
now. It was something to be excited about.
Yeah.
It was something to have on the calendar, something to look forward to. And the K-pop industry also heavily invested in online concerts. Another great thing that you can do from your own home. So like during like the 2 years, I watched like 30 concerts.
Wow.
That's a lot.
Online from my bed in my pajamas at
It sounds
roughly
very comfy.
like $20 a piece. And then sometimes you could actually have 2 logins for one ticket price, so we'd split it with a friend. We're like, all right, yeah, for $10 we're gonna like have a fun Saturday night where we're like, yeah, like probably like on a phone call and then also watching another laptop and be also texting a friend, and like, you know, it's this like simultaneous like experience.
Do you do the
of
lighter
things
thing in
that
your
you can do.
room, or like how does that work?
It just brought so much joy and excitement to my life. And yeah, and then I just had all so much time. So I really went down the rabbit hole of like almost every group also has a reality TV show.
Ooh.
And interviews and goofy games and just hours of content, hundreds of hours of content. So
By the way, to me, a little bit online concerts feel like a little bit of a scam. Yeah, just in the sense like you lose out actually on a lot of the things that make a concert worthwhile or I guess exceptionally valuable, because here's the thing, like you can find a recording of a concert anywhere and there's no guarantee that you're watching it live at all. And that's kind of the thing that's cool about a live concert, is that you are seeing the music played live, but it might not be when you watch a concert like this, like a over the internet concert. This might be some recording they're going to play 6 times, over the course of a week, and it's all, different concerts, but they only had to do it once. And the fact that they had to only do it once isn't the problem. It's just that like you don't have that live aspect. You can watch a recording of music being performed for free. Why am I paying money to see a recording? You go, maybe it's not a recording. Yeah, but maybe it is, and I don't really have a way of knowing. Or when you go to see a concert live, you understand what you're paying for. There's a venue. There's the people have to come out there, and all the work to get up. Well, I guess there's a lot of stuff that goes into like music production that's the same. But that you're going to see it being performed in front of you live feels very different. I don't know. Maybe I could be convinced on that, but it does feel a little bit like a scam.
So yeah, so I went from being someone who sort of casually listened to K-pop while I worked to someone who closely follows like 12 groups. And this year alone, I have already in concert seen Monsta X, Stray Kids twice, 17, Epic High, CIX, and I have tickets to the Rose in November.
Oh,
and
wow.
I would see more if they would just simply come to the Bay Area. They can take my dollars. We'll give them my dollars.
Take my
Yes,
money.
That
take
meme,
my
shut up
money,
and take my
please.
money.
Yeah. So.
I think as a K-pop neophyte, I guess, as the new kid on the block, I'm just so obsessed with the idea of like how, like just the whole
Okay,
production.
so
of it.
Yeah.
Like,
are we
because
gonna
it's
come
so-
back to talking about the
it's so
book, or
It's so much. Okay, this is like probably my favorite thing about K-pop.
My
and
guess
why
is we're
I
not going to come
also-
back to the discussion about genderqueer, and the reason why I'm pointing that out is because we got a decent amount to go, but there's another hour-long panel, and maybe there will be more on that. So why don't we swap over, see if they're talking about genderqueer, and then if not, we can come back to this. All right? Because I am mostly interested in discussions of the book, given that we just read it. So let's try this one. It seems like they're going to be talking about K-pop for a while, and possibly not come back to the book at all. Come on, YouTube, you can do it. I believe in you. Loading of videos, the whole thing. That's like your whole thing. That's the thing you do. Come on. There it is. All right. No? Did I ruin everything? Are we just not gonna be able to load now? All right. All right, we're gonna not skip ahead because apparently YouTube's having issues with that.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hi. I lied. We're gonna try. Nope. Damn it. Come on. All right. I guess we can't try to find the right spot in it. I don't know
Hello,
what's up with
hello,
YouTube right here
hello.
right now.
Hi. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be here. Let's see if I can put this without spilling tea into the. Oh
Oh, another tea drinker. Hell yeah.
my. Yes. um, I'm so excited to be here. This is such a treat. Maya and I have known each other for a long time. My name is Justin Hall. I'm a cartoonist and the chair of the MFA in Comics program at California College of the Arts, which is where Maya went to.
I just realized we met 9 years ago.
Oh my
It's 2013.
God. I haven't changed at all.
Yeah. We're both exactly the same.
Identical. Have you read Hitchens' article about making tea? I haven't. Do you want to shoot that over? Maybe we can go over it on stream some point.
Maya, why don't you introduce yourself?
Oh, okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm an author and illustrator. I've actually personally talked to almost everyone who already is in this crowd, so you know. I'm from the California Bay Area. I use the pronouns EMR. I wrote this book, Jennifer.
Hey, we were right about the pronunciation. Good job. We did it. EMR. All right.
More, which came out about 3 years ago now. It is the story of my life. So also, if you've read it, you know a lot about me. I described it once as wretchedly intimate. And of course, it was the most challenged book in the US of last year. So that is a thing that has really sort of changed the conversation around this book in my experience
Yeah,
of being
I would
a published
imagine.
author, specifically in the last 12 months. It's been a real roller coaster of highs and lows, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, one thing I do want to ask about is that sort of odd, you just mentioned this odd concept where you've made a memoir that is quite intimate, and then people feel like they know you, and they know some aspect of you, a sort of avatar of you, but they don't necessarily know you. So I mean, this is sort of the memoirist's dilemma, right? Like, how have you handled that?
Yeah, it's very interesting because I definitely have people who've read the book and it really moved them, and they come up and they want to chat with me as if we both know each other the same amount.
I mean, that's just like kind of a risk of parasociality, right? That's the thing people talk about all the time now.
True. They know a fair amount about me, but not everything, because I am 33 years old and this book is only 240 pages, so it's not every single day of my whole life.
Oh, is it not?
But usually,
Weird.
what I try to do is if someone comes up and wants to have that type of conversation, what I need to do is then ask them, like, well, tell me about yourself. Like, what are your creative projects?
That's a risky move. I get where you're coming from, and you'll probably explain it in just a second. But it's risky because someone might be like, you know what, you told me something really intimate. Let me tell you about my first sexual experience. And I don't know that that's the conversation you want. It seems unlikely that anyone wants that conversation, or that most people would.
Dreams and goals and fears and past and all of that, and I try to, I guess, almost like bridge that intimacy gap level as much as I can, especially if it's like a signing and I only get to talk to people for like 5 minutes a piece or 10 minutes. It's hard, but it means that I think when I meet people, I end up just sitting and doing a lot of listening, because I'm like, well, they already know about me or some of the major things that I have to talk about. But if someone related to my book, it probably means we have stuff in common and that we might be able to be friends. And
something to note about that, especially on the topic of parasociality. One, there's the thing we were talking about prior, where towards the end of the book, you were less and less in Maya's head. But also, we just learned about our interest in K-pop. We had no clue. And I guess that wasn't even the case at the end of the book. Just remember, just because you read a memoir, you don't necessarily know everything about a person. You know the things they felt important to tell you.
I just want to hear, like, well, where are you coming from and what is your story? And then also, usually by the end of it, I'm like, have you considered writing a memoir? Because I do think, as we talked about a little bit in the banned books panel last night, like, I do truly believe every single person in the world has a life interesting enough to warrant a memoir if they're called to write one.
Another grand tragedy of human experience. I've already mentioned that we're forever trapped in our own skulls and only get out so much. But yeah, another grand tragedy is that it is impossible to know the depth of experience of even a single other person, let alone the billions of people that exist and have existed and will exist, that we can know so little of each other despite being surrounded by one another. It's another, as I said, another tragedy of human experience.
And specifically people who have not seen their story as much reflected in the mainstream media.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is when did you do the self-portrait?
I did this self-portrait as part of an assignment at California College of
Oh
Arts.
yeah, I didn't notice there's
this
the
is
bird,
an assignment from Chris.
the little bird in the nest in their hoodie. You know, it's a bird. It's cute.
Polar's inking techniques class, where
Eggs
we
and
had
everything.
to draw portraits of ourselves in 4 different styles, and this is the one that was easiest for me because it was just with, I think I used probably just Sakura Micron, thin nibbed pens, which is what I was working on the big project I did as my MFA thesis at the time. And so I also had to do one in gouache and one in watercolor and a couple of other medias that I was not as familiar with, but I was like, this is my jam. And I was also at the time working on a long-running medieval fantasy webcomic, which I have completely deleted from the internet now. But this was the style of the web.
I have copies to say. Yeah.
Want some of few. But this was the style of the webcomic I was working on at the time. So you can also see, this is like about 2012, 2013. This is sort of the style of my art at the time entering grad school. And I think, obviously you can tell, I think that it's me and that I drew it, but you can also tell that I've simplified a lot and I do much less cross-hatching than I used to do.
But also it shows off some of your obsessions, right? The sort of naturalist elements.
I found this article. Read it after.
In the hoodie, the sort of medieval elements that show up a lot in your work.
Yeah. Or did at that time. I mean, it's an aesthetic I still absolutely love. Trung and I literally got lost on the walk here this morning because we were looking at this gorgeous sort of Gothic style church, and we were so entranced by the stained glass windows and flying buttresses, et cetera, that we walked right past the street we were supposed to turn on and walked 10 minutes in the wrong direction talking about Italian architecture. I'm like, oh shoot, we were supposed to turn on that street. So I'm still very, very attracted to this type of art, but it's not the type of art that I really make anymore.
Yeah.
And I would like to go back to it, but I don't know when that will be.
Well,
maybe you had mentioned having an interest in drawing spaceships and dragons. Maybe you could write a comic that's like fantasy in a medieval theme. That would be pretty cool, right? Seems like it's something you want to do. That'd be awesome. I'd read that.
Book as well, so I want to talk about that at some point as well. But to get the sort of elephant out of the room, which you mentioned in the beginning, is of course that this book, Genderqueer, was the most challenging.
In case anyone's confused, I'm pretty sure the cover on the right is the deluxe edition. Oh, it actually says so. Yeah, it's the deluxe edition. I saw that when looking around for the book, whereas the regular version is the cover we've seen.
2 years running, I guess.
Both are good, I think.
It was
in different
officially
ways.
the most challenged book in the U.S. of 2021. It will likely be number 1 of 2022, but we won't know until early next year. They will count up all the challenges that have been reported to ALA and the National Coalition Against Censorship and the American Library Association and PEN America keep track of the ones that are reported. And there are also probably many more challenges that go unreported, but they at least track all the ones that they hear about and that librarians.
Number 1, baby.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So sort of thinking about the whole journey of that, this is from a piece that you did for the Washington Post, an op-ed about the experience. So can you?
Yeah, this is there was a panel from the book, but also, oh no, I forgot. No, YouTube, please. No. No. I don't know why it's having so much difficulty with. Okay, all right, I figured it out. Yeah, this is a panel from the book. If I remember, this is about a different book, but led us to the understanding that maybe Maya had an idea about the challenges that were forthcoming. But we've also, in the previous interview, seen a pretty significant amount of hints, not stated outright, but a significant number of hints that it was never intended for. It was never specifically intended as a children's book. It was intended as a memoir and to be treated as such for whatever age range is appropriate, which seems pretty clearly 18 and up.
About the experience. So can you walk us through, so the publication of the book happens, and then the book is sold and it does what it does in the world, it does well, and then it suddenly pops back up.
Yes, I know. It was very strange because when I was first working on the book in 2018, I was part of a really great writing comics crit group, and one of the people in the group, it was the cartoonist Jimmy Robinson. He's a very sweet guy. He did this series called 5 Weapons, among others, and he read an early draft, and he said, this book will be challenged, and take it as a compliment when that happens. Also, maybe get friendly with the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund right now. And he said that to me in 2018, and I kind of had that in my brain all along, and when it came out in 2019, I did think to myself, naive. I know that queer and trans content frequently receives pushback
Yep.
on the internet, in public, etc. So I did brace myself. I was like, is there going to be like a big negative reaction? And there really wasn't at the time. It was actually received with a ton of love. The first print run, which was around 5,000 copies, sold out the week of release, and then we had already ordered a second printing like the same summer it came out, and like librarians were buying it, and then in 20.
So this is something to note, is that it was a success from the outset, right out the gate, you know, selling the entirety of the first print run very, very quickly. The reason why that's relevant is because it's not that this was an obscure book that picked up and then got challenged because it was gaining popularity. It was popular from the outset. The challenges weren't in response to also were not a response to growing popularity. They were a response to anti queer fervor. And we see more evidence of that coming out of like, well, it was popular from the outset, so that can't be why. It can't be just that, you know, we can imagine a world where it comes out in 2019, nobody really cares. Then in 2022, it starts being, you know, it starts becoming super popular, and people are suggesting it for kids, and then you have these challenges. But that's not what happened. That's not what happened at all. Just more again towards answering the question of whether it's appropriate for kids with the answer of it doesn't matter, and it's never mattered. It's not the right question.
It won 2 awards from the American Library Association. It won an Alex Award and a Stonewall Honor, and it really seemed like it was just receiving this amazingly warm, like loving reception. And then doing like as well as like a medium level book from a medium level publisher from a debut author did. I was like very happy with its success, but it wasn't like unbelievable success, you know. And then in almost about a year ago, in September of last year, I was tagged in a social media post of a parent ranting about how terrible this book was and how inappropriate and how it was pornography and I'm a pedophile and grooming and all of these relative.
Exactly. It starts with the fervor. The whole thing starts with this, like, look, it's inappropriate for kids. No one ever said it was for kids. It's pornography. It's not. It's very clearly not. There is exactly like 3 panels that you could even argue are close to pornography. It's not, right? You know, but it starts with someone getting mad about this queer stuff, and that's where it all comes from, you know.
Really nasty words that get used on the internet because they draw reactions. And this was in a school district in Virginia, the state of Virginia, and I was like, this is a block and delete situation. And I literally was just like, block, delete, went to bed, moved on. And that was like the first domino of a whole series of events that I would never have predicted. And that ban got very highly publicized because there was a governor race going on in the state of Virginia at the time. The governor made book banning and like parents' rights to control what sort of like media is used in the classroom a real talking point of his campaign. Unfortunately, he then didn't win the election, so I think other Republican politicians.
And by the way, there are sections of this book that you could show to kids of basically any age, as long as it's just that section, right? So even that it's in a classroom, you have to ask what parts of it were shown in a classroom, if at all. I don't think, I'm guessing they weren't, because again, if you're willing to ban this book, it's not like, if a school district's willing to ban the book, it's not like you're buying it for their classes anyway. But there are definitely portions where you can just, there's absolutely nothing wrong with showing it to younger kids.
Like, oh, this is a useful talking point. Oh, like things like immigration and abortion, these touch point topics we can turn.
But it's like you said, it wasn't being taught in schools. Yeah. So the implication of what Maya was just saying was that like maybe it was being discussed in classrooms because so it wasn't part of the curriculum, but the implication was like maybe teachers were using it, like we're showing it a little bit, or like using it in part of their as like part of discussion or something. I doubt it, but like yeah, I don't. Yeah, it's a little hazy because we don't really. It's not being discussed in very clear terms. But yeah, like it's not part of the curriculum. It definitely was not part of the curriculum.
To vote to the polls, and I literally kept thinking like, surely this is gonna like blow over, and there's like a band in Virginia, and then there's a second one in another place in Virginia, and then there's one in Florida, and then there's one in Ohio, and then Pennsylvania, and then Rhode Island, and then Alaska, and then I was like, then there were so many. I just
Notice mostly red states. It's kind of interesting, right? The like Republicans will be like, that's because liberals are groomers or whatever, but like more accurately, it's because the red states are the more likely ones to have reactionary sentiments.
Crack. But also, I'm so used to things on the internet when they go viral to have a moment and then kind of fade. The next thing, a cute cat falls off a couch or something, and then everyone is forgetting about books or whatever it is. What I think has surprised me most about this is like the staying power of the story of banned books and queer books.
This is kind of new.
My book being kind of like the poster child of this moment. It's surprising to me how much is still in the media a full year later. And yeah, I keep thinking like, surely the weirdest has happened, and then something else even weirder occurs. But so
the midterm election's coming up too. I mean, it's only getting up.
I know. So we'll see what that brings. But yeah, I think the experience for me, like emotionally, first was like kind of a certain amount of like shock, like, oh my gosh, why is this book is almost 3 years old? Why is this happening now? And then how do I respond to this? And then just an absolute flood of media requests, everyone wanting an interview from like college papers, high school papers, very small regional papers, all the way up to like NPR and like the New York Times, and me being like, oh my God, like I'm
so you got a
so
bunch
many
of
people. If I responded to all of
got
them,
a bunch of people in chat that are not used to seeing. Feel free to say something, say hi. It's either like 8 people hanging out. Feel free to say hi, and if you haven't followed, hit me with a follow. It doesn't cost you anything. You can see when I'm on. Talk about all sorts of cool stuff.
I would accidentally become a
shilling
full-time
for
public
myself
speaker
there.
who has no time to write or draw, and that's not what I want. But how do I decide which ones are worth to respond to and which ones I can kind of ignore? And I was very like,
was that
for
slutty
a little
enough?
while, I felt very like,
no comment.
almost like a panicky, like I have to, respond to this. I need to make my voice heard, et cetera, et cetera. And it was also because I thought it was going to blow over more quickly. So I was like, okay, if this is like a thing that's in the media for 2 months, I should do at least like 4 really good interviews in that time or something. And I think now I'm like, oh, this is more of a long haul situation.
Yeah, seems like it.
And now I'm kind of like, and also I got a really good piece of advice from the woman who was the publicity head at Oni at the time, who has moved on to greener pastures, Tara. And she said, let's just only respond to things that have national reach. Mm-hmm. And I was like, thank you, a guideline. This is very helpful. Now I can like have a reason for saying no to like a whole bunch of these things. But when it's NPR, I'll say yes, that kind of thing. So.
You actually, a little bit earlier, told me that you had a hint about how to say no, which is a big,
yes.
It's a real problem for me, at least.
So I got to meet the wonderful author and editor at Scholastic, David Levithan, who was one of my very favorite authors when I was a teenager, because he was one of the first people writing YA books that had happy endings.
Oh.
There were people who wrote queer YA books before him, but like he wrote like Boy Meets Boy, which is this like very sweet story about like a gay boy in like a town that has like almost no homophobia, and like instead of Boy Scouts they have like the Joy Scouts that are like gender neutral, and there's like a drag queen running as is the star quarterback and also running for like homecoming queen at the same time. It's very like sweet and joyful. He wrote this book in like 2003, which is the year that I was in 8th grade, and that was very impactful for me to like read that. Anyway, I got to have breakfast with him at ALA over the summer, and I expressed to him this feeling of like, I'm getting so many requests and I don't know what to say yes to and what to say no to. And he said, think of it this way. If you get an invite to like an event or an interview, and if it was tomorrow, would you want to do it if it's tomorrow? Would it be exciting? And if the answer is yes, you should do it. But if you wouldn't want to do it if it's tomorrow, say no. Because I was like saying yes to things that were like 4 months out. Because I was like, yeah, I could do that in January of next year, sure.
Yeah,
and then
sometime in the nebulous future.
Like, oh God, my life is very full. But he was like, yeah, if you would want to do it if it's tomorrow, say yes. And I was like, oh.
That's great advice.
It's really good, because he also faced a lot of book bans and challenges in his career. So he's
well, I'm sure. Yeah, he's writing positive queer stories.
Like, requests and like speaking engagements and like what do you?
The series Angela Anaconda features a casual queerness, which is fitting considering both creators are gay. The show also has one of her friends who's very coded gay, being himself in the best way, portrayed as strong and heartfelt, and has an amazingly positive relationship with his macho football coach father. Oh, that's pretty cool.
Also, and you touched on this a bit last night, but like all 3 of the guests did. But there's this sort of, it must be sort of a mind Yeah. Um, uh, that your book is going to get so much more attention and sales from the banning, which is also then hurting a lot of the people that you most wanted to read the book. And it's
This is
also just,
why boycotts don't work. Is you start to like part of why, not entirely, but like you're bringing attention to this thing that you ostensibly don't like. That said, it's only partially true. Bannings work; they matter. You know, like if this book, for example, were federally banned for distribution, that would hurt this book a lot, right? Like the distribution and all this stuff. Like um, that would be like a pretty serious problem. It's not just like, oh, but you're drawing attention to it. No, like that would be bad. So it's only like because it got banned in like yes, it got banned in a lot of school districts, but they're just small school districts. It's not the same thing as like a statewide ban even would be a pretty big deal.
sort of horrendous sort of attack on oneself and as a creator. So
In part because
how
it also, as I guess I didn't finish the thought. In part, these bannings would also legitimize the idea that you can ban books that you don't like or like with queer stuff in them. Right? That's part of the problem. Is that even if this book specifically might maybe still have readers or whatever, just like it's contraband, that it that you can say, well, it's okay to ban books like this. Then the next step is very easy to say, well, it's you're not allowed to publish books like this in the first place if they're just going to be banned, or maybe you're not allowed to produce them, or so on and so forth. Um, I don't want to make like the slippery slope argument, though. That said, things do progress in that way sometimes. I just mean to say that while on the one hand, yes, there's all this notoriety, it's mostly because it has been, by and large, ineffective. Most school districts have not banned it. Most local libraries have not banned this book. It is nationally not banned. That makes these smaller efforts counterproductive, but if they ever gain traction, they become very productive towards
how
negative
are you
ends, to be clear.
squaring that sort of mental conundrum and emotional conundrum of like, on the one hand, it gives you a larger platform actually, and more people are going to read this
Well,
book.
for now, right?
But also,
Yeah.
it's an attack.
Yeah, it is hard because it has given me a platform that I never had before, and it has given me opportunities that I wouldn't have had otherwise. It has also like kept me up at night and like wasted a ton of my time.
Right.
So there's real pros and cons to that. And then I think I'm pretty good at not taking it as a personal attack on like an emotional level. I'm just really good at compartmentalizing. And then B, so many of the people who challenge the book have said, literally in quotes to the media, I haven't read it, but I think it's inappropriate. And
so common.
that was
like this is something I was pointing out before. Zero chance Tim Pool read the fucking book, but I've seen him talk about it as being like, oh, it's so inappropriate, yada yada, etc. Like, yeah, he even owns a copy. I've seen him hold it up.
like, okay, this is not a judgment of my work because they haven't even read my work.
No, it's a judgment of
challenged. I think
your
it's just sort of
in a way like your person, right? It's a challenge. They're taking issue with the concept of non-cis normative existence, and like it's more of a personal attack in a way. If you don't take it that way, good for you. But yeah, it's about like the validity of your existence that they take issue with, and that this book could possibly talk about it. But they can take cover in saying, well, it's inappropriate for kids because there's like a sex scene or whatever. Yeah.
like this book was in it's like that right place, wrong time sort of situation where I think my book got dubbed the poster child of this moment for like, there's sort of three reasons that I see. One is that it's a comic. We talked about last night that I think when stories have words, images paired with words, things can hit harder. It hits more emotionally. It's a little more visceral, and also it's easier to spread images and have them go viral on social media than like a screen cap of like a paragraph of written text.
Very true.
So I think it's because it's a comic. I think it's because of the title. If you are searching like queer book or book about gender, this one's going to come up pretty near the top of the results list because I named it exactly. What it says on the tin is what is inside the can. It's exactly what you get. And then I also think it's because it won a couple of ALA awards, which means that librarians tend to buy all the books that win the ALA awards. So if a parent who was more conservative and didn't
Maybe that's why it's showing
might
up.
object to this type of book, saw news of a challenge in one area and then said, oh, is that book also in my public library or in my high school library? It would be, because the librarians had supported it.
Okay, now it's starting to come together. So, released a book just to be air memoir. It wins a bunch of awards, so librarians buy it, not considering whether it's appropriate or not to be in a high school library, for example. Sounds like it wasn't in libraries of younger age ranges. It wasn't in like middle school or elementary school libraries. In public libraries, it makes sense, right? Why not? It's a public library, and this book won a bunch of awards. Cool. But then in a high school library, well, maybe the librarian should have been paying more attention to what's appropriate and what's not. But that's not the fault of the book or the author. That's more um, that's more that the librarians weren't paying attention to what they're bringing, because there's a lot of books that will win awards that are inappropriate for high school kids. Maybe you should be more observant, more like, take more care in what you purchase for the library. Uh, that said, like, if a 17 and a half year old or whatever reads this book, like, it's not that, like, it's not that inappropriate for someone that age. You know, there could be high schoolers that are, mature enough to handle this kind of stuff, and it'd be one of those, like, you should talk to people or whatever, like your parents and teachers and whatever. But like, that it's in these high school libraries, it's not because anyone's pushing it on the kids, quote unquote. And it doesn't necessitate a ban necessarily. It just might be like, hey, librarian, maybe this book isn't appropriate. Maybe this shouldn't be here, and then you move on. I'm sure this kind of thing happens all the time.
So it's kind of like it was widespread enough that the challenges would find it wherever they looked.
And by the way, to take issue with like its presence in high school libraries, given like that's how it got there, isn't a way to say like it was. If someone was to place the blame with the author, it's basically to say like it was wrong for you to have a book that won awards and was inappropriate for kids, which is nonsense. But of course, the real issue is that the reactions to this are, it was wrong of you to have a book about queer stuff that won a bunch of awards and that kids could see. That's the actual problem people actually have with it. They'll just frame it as being inappropriate for kids. But yeah, I agree. It probably shouldn't be in high school libraries, but it's not Maya's fault, and it's not the book's fault. It's the librarians not paying enough attention to what they're stocking.
Know that there's groups like this group, very ironically titled Moms for Liberty,
oh god,
that are literally like organizing on Facebook, etc., to like do these copycat challenges in every single school district, and it'll be like, oh, in my district we managed to get these 3 books removed, see if you can get them removed in your district.
I guess it's been appropriate, being appropriate in colleges. Well, yeah, because in college students are adults by and large. I mean, unless there's someone who's like, the super genius kid who got into college at 13 or whatever. Like, but by and large, people in college are adults. I think I agree with you if you're implying that it would be particularly relevant to people of that age range. Then yeah, I would agree also. But like, it's anyone 18 and up it could be appropriate for, or at least available in general libraries. Yeah, again, like, yeah, this was being banned in local libraries for some reason. Why? It's nonsense, right? Like, reminder to everybody, because we talked about this quite kind of a while ago on the stream, but like, Haunted is a book that is highly, highly, highly inappropriate for anyone under the age of 18, and possibly a little older than that. It's a very graphic book. But I checked this out from a local library when I read it, because why not? People of any age can go to a public library. It was just in the fiction section. I bet the same libraries would totally be okay with Lolita. Yeah, because that's like great literature or whatever. Like, yeah, there's a lot of like really nebulous and arbitrary stuff. Did I read Survivor also? I think I read Survivor also. Definitely read Snuff. I read a lot of these books. I was really big into politics. I just keep forgetting. I come back here. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember this book. lot of these I'd never heard of though. Fight Club 2. There's a Fight Club 2. Why is there a Fight Club 2 and 3? What is going? All right, we're avoiding the rabbit hole. We're going back to the interview.
Books.
And
They're just pulling them.
And the fact that it's a really good point that comics have a sort of double standard to them because of the visual nature.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think
Yeah, something that is a lot less graphic in a comic appears a lot more graphic because you have an image. That's why I'm mentioning something like Haunted, where it's so far and away more graphic that it's not close to being close. So like anyone who's familiar with it would be like, yeah, that is much more graphic. But it doesn't have the images, so like it's harder to you'd have to read it. And possibly, another hurdle for reactionaries, you'd have to be literate to take issue with it. And you can't be sure the reactionaries are, but they can see an image. They can do that.
There's a slippery slope of, your book is clearly not pornography because it's not designed to titillate, but it has a naked body in it, for example.
There is exactly one shot where I'm like, you could argue this is approach like this like can be viewed as intended to be like titillating, I guess is the word. Exactly one, and it's arguable. Or I guess maybe like 1.5. But obviously on the whole, it's not pornographic, right?
And this idea that if you display a naked body, it is ipso facto pornography is so infuriating, especially to those of us who make pornography.
Yeah.
And also like anyone who's even vaguely aware of the fact that like anatomy class exists or health class or whatever, like nudity is not inherently sexual or pornographic, right?
Whole separate craft. It takes a lot of skill.
Yeah.
It's actually really hard to draw things and make them look sexy.
It is. Yeah. So
it's easier to make them not sexy, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about what happens next then. The Comic Book Legal Defense Fund did, in fact, help you.
Yeah, so...
Oh, I didn't know this. Amazon Kane saying, Pretty Little Liars is a wildly popular YA book, and it's sensationalized. One of the girls is in a relationship with her teacher. One has an eating disorder. One's gay. One cheats due to academic pressure. And I'm guessing this book isn't banned anywhere. I mean, it certainly didn't make the list as most challenged books. Yeah, it's kind of funny that there are graphic or sex scenes that go into great detail that don't get the same backlash. Yeah, and to be clear, when I talk about Haunted, in terms of how graphic it is, I know you're not talking about this specifically, but Haunted is graphic on every axis. It has really gross like body horror. It has graphic sex scenes. It has like psychological horror, like on every aspect. It's like written to disturb you, but it doesn't get all these huge bannings. Like it would be okay. It should definitely not be in high school book libraries, even though I was in high school when I read it. But actually no, I wasn't in high school when I finished it, but I was in high school when the teaser chapters were making the rounds in my class. I guess the book was out, but it was like I hadn't read the whole thing yet. I don't think. Maybe it was like either as I was in high school or just after. I don't know.
The kind of rough timeline is it's like September of last year. I hear about one ban. Between September and October, it is then challenged in like 15 more states. Things sort of quieted down over the winter break, and I was like, maybe that's it. And then there was like another slew of bans in like January and February, which is also when Moz was like removed in that one district in Tennessee, which bumped it back up onto the New York Times bestseller list, within sort of like started another round of it through the media. And then there were then sort of like a trickle of further bans, but also just like really weird media incidents through like February through March of this year. And then in May, a person who was running for a Republican congressional candidate in the state of Virginia sued a Barnes & Noble location in Virginia Beach for carrying genderqueer and another book, a het fairy tale romance novel by Sarah J. Maas, the second book of the Court of Thorns and Roses series, not the first book or the last book, but the second of a series of 8.
Weird.
And claimed that they were obscene and should not.
I wonder if something similar is why I had a particular quirk in my high school. I tried to read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which I quite enjoyed, and I was like, oh, it's a series, like let's read that. But my school library had books 1, 2, and 4 of the 5-part series. So it was a. I wonder. I always wondered what happened to book 3. Why is that one missing? Um,
Be basically available to minors. I think maybe they wanted the books to be like kept behind the counter, and you'd have to like show ID as if you were like buying an adult magazine, maybe. But like it was very unclear what they actually wanted from this, because also
They wanted
this
it to
person
not
who brought the
exist, let's be
lawsuit was
real.
running a distant third in his campaign, was running like $90,000 behind the lead congressional candidates, and was projected to lose his election. And he also pushed to have the first hearing of the lawsuit in the first week of the month of June. The primary was on June 21st, and a judge took one look at it and pushed the hearing to June 26th. So it's like, we will put this after the primary.
Oh, and thank you for Pride Month too.
Yes,
that's
and
yeah.
it's Pride Month. And so he did lose his election, as predicted. That's nice. But the lawsuit continued, and it got like pushed and pushed again.
And yeah, this just backs up what I was saying before. Like, this guy was doing it for like the political clout. Yeah, he was doing it to try to win this primary.
Is that the legal process is very slow. But yes, almost immediately the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund stepped in to sort of represent genderqueer. Again, I was not being sued. It was a Barnes & Noble that was being sued, but like my book was sort of like evidence in the case. And Barnes & Noble lawyered up because they were like, we are a place of business and we cannot be defending every book we sell book by book. That is just not viable for our business model. So they were like, hired the absolute best lawyers you possibly can. And the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund represented my book, and then the publisher of the other novel represented that book. And I had many meetings with lawyers and reviewed drafts of statements. I was very grateful that I at no point had to like appear in court.
That's good.
And that kind of dragged on all the way. It got pushed to July, it got pushed to August, it got pushed to the end of August. The hearing ended up being on August 30th. And a judge heard the opening.
Which reminds me, in case I hadn't mentioned it, part of why we haven't discussed any more details about like the Trump trial is that it's slated to start in mid-August. The expectation is that it'll be less than a month to conclude, to actually do the trial portion, but hasn't started yet, so there's nothing to say about it.
Statements,
in case anyone's wondering.
Took a brief recess and actually dismissed the case before my lawyers even had a chance to speak.
Yeah.
Specifically, the judge decided not to rule on the situation of whether the books were or were not obscene. What she actually ruled on is that there were due process issues in the case, and she ruled that the very antiquated law that they were trying to use to declare the books obscene, which was from the 1970s and had not been used in over 50 years, was actually unconstitutional. So the
that's
law
what I mean
was
about those
actually
obscenity
changed,
laws still exist.
That makes me hopeful that this law will not then be able to be used in any further copycat lawsuits. Yeah. And that was part of why the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund stepped in, is because, I mean, their whole mission statement is to defend cartoonists who are facing legal troubles, but they were like, we want to make sure the people who are banning books don't think that suing authors and bookstores directly is like a viable route. So we need to like nip this in the bud.
Yeah, that's really important for sure.
Disastrous.
Yes, especially because if it had worked, then they would be like, well, now we're going to sue. Oh, yeah. Now we're going to sue Mari. Now we're going to sue Alison Bechtel. Now we're going to sue whoever. They would have just probably made a list, and they would have gone down it and just sued everyone.
Yeah.
Right? So
yeah, for sure.
And one of the other things they told me is that unfortunately,
no question,
many lawsuits are just a war of attrition. It's just whoever can keep affording to pay their legal fees wins the case. And if you run out of money and you can't pay your lawyer, then you don't have anyone to represent you, and then the case will maybe go to the other side.
So that's a thing that comes up all the time, and it's an extremely unfortunate aspect towards legal processes. Like, you want to say like, oh, the law is neutral and handles these things, but lawsuits are expensive, so often it's just the richest party wins. Or alternatively, someone with enough money can drum up a bunch of legal issues that will drain whoever they have an issue with, irrespective of the legitimacy of their legal action. Just another problem of good old capitalism. Yay.
America.
Okay. So I want to talk.
And it doesn't have to be like this, by the way. Even in a capitalist society, you can just like, why not have all legal representation done by the state, right? Like, every lawyer who like works for the government, and when you have a case, like when you want to like do any lawsuit, you go through estate lawyer, which means everyone has access to that for free, maybe to like sue you, like maybe there are different kinds of court charges, but like you won't need to hire and afford an attorney to defend yourself from frivolous claims. Possibly is an option.
Do some of your fantasy work, but talk a little bit about how you got to this book in the first place, right? So a lot of the genderqueer material started out as zine material, right? So tell us how this began.
Yeah. So anyone who came to my talk last night heard the fun anecdote about how I had my first memoir writing experience in a class with Mari in 2013, and I was very resistant to this assignment. But 3 years down the line, I'm graduated from grad school. I have more experience in comics. I'm starting to show at, go to Comic-Con and other conventions. And also was starting to decided I want to come out as non-binary to my community, specifically my like extended family and like comics professional community. And I was having such a hard time like getting it across in conversations, even knowing like when do I even say
that came
like,
up
hey,
in the
I use
book.
different pronouns now. How do I interject that into a conversation? And feeling like
by the way, I think it can be that easy, but of course it's worrying in part because there's a lot of cultural resistance that you might expect, and also Maya seems like a bit of an awkward person. I relate. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that's like a negative, but it makes things a little more difficult.
Talk with people about it. I could never say everything I was trying to say, and so I was like, I think I need to write about this. I think I need to sit down and take the time in comics, which feels like the media that I feel most eloquent and most versed in, to like really figure out what I'm trying to say in like the shortest, most condensed, clear, short form. And so I drew all these little tiny black and white memoir comics. I was definitely referencing the style of James Kochalka's American Elf series, drawing like a little square comic every day with a little title over it. And
no cross-hatching at all.
No cross-hatching at all. Look at that. We've moved on. Artistic development. Anyway, and so when I sat down to start drawing these, it went from me thinking like, how do I say this? And then I drew 60 of these little strips in 2 weeks.
It's a lot.
I was like, oh, I have like a lot.
This has already come up,
actually.
but that was a lot.
Part of it was also, I did not try to write them chronologically whatsoever. I just sat down and any thought that I had that seemed related to gender, or any memory or interaction that felt gendered.
That's why this is like the equivalent of brainstorming, right? You always get that advice. If you feel like you have too much to say in like a structured way, just get it all out. Start there, and then later you can try to put it together. You do the same thing with this is a similar process that happens with debate cases, actually. Bringing it back to competitive debate, as we've mentioned before, is part of the process, as I recall, is like you start with the absurd amount of information that could be relevant to this, and then you start to develop arguments, and you just throw them out until you start condensing into how do I want to put this, in what way, which arguments are strongest. It's the same kind of thing, but in this case, because it's an artistic endeavor, you don't even really need to structure it at the end of it. But it is helpful to get it all out. Just like don't try to structure it. You'll spend too much time on that you'll never get started. And try to figure out everything you want to say before you've said anything.
I just wrote down as they sort of came to me, very stream of consciousness, and I wrote a whole bunch of them. And then I was like, oh my God, I have a lot to say, and also these are so personal. Can I ever share this work? Oh my God. And first I like sent it to like my sibling and my best friend, and I was like, are they good? And then when I got like positive feedback and love and support, then I shared it with like a slightly wider group of people, like some of my grad school cohort, and they sent me back like love and feedback and support. And then every time I sort of shared it, and then I sent it, like emailed the comics to my extended family to be like, hey, I'm coming out, here's some comics, read them. And then that same year, which was 2016, I challenged myself to post one every day on Instagram during Inktober. And it was kind of like I used the format of Inktober to be like, okay, you have to post one every day. And if I got to one that I was like, oh God, this one is so personal. No, I mentioned masturbation. This is awful. Why did I write this? I would post it at like 3 in the morning, being like, maybe no one will see it if I post it in the middle of the night, which is so not funny. How the internet works. But anyway, but yeah, so that was sort of like, I was like, this is how I will come out to my friends and comics peers.
I imagine this is. I mean, some of you here make memoir comics as well?
Hopefully everyone.
And this is. I mean, it's
I
tough.
appreciate
Right?
that
This is a
encouragement.
huge. Like, I'm sort of getting chills even like thinking about it. Even for people who have been doing it for a long time, it's still. It should be difficult. Actually, if it's going to be good, it should be difficult.
Yeah.
I like that sentiment.
So okay, so then moving from this sort of level of what you're doing and sort of producing this kind of work, then you have to
Yes.
take this raw material and turn it into a book. So
Yes.
how did you do this? So
Yeah.
you can see the sort of scene here.
Yeah,
Gets
it's
Oh yeah,
exactly
you
the
can
same.
see like it's
I
the same.
literally traced it.
However, important detail. There's another cat in the colorized version. It's a vast improvement. More kitties, usually better.
Photoshop. So yeah, I drew the little black and white strips for about a year, and I think I had over 100 of them when I was like, oh, I think this might be enough content for a book, maybe. Really was not thinking book in the beginning. I was thinking this is a tool to come out. And then I was like, oh, perhaps a book. And here is one of the advantages of going to grad school is networking. One of my good friends, Samuel Satin, had signed a book deal with a company at that time called Lionforge before I had. And he said, I think my editor would be really interested in your work. And that editor was Andrea Colvin, who's now at Little Brown Young Readers. She's wonderful.
Yeah.
I do notice a kind of a tendency because we're looking into a subculture here, right? We're looking at people who publish in small presses, often comics or whatever. There seems to be you get a little bit of a hint of that when there's a mention of someone and like there's an expectation of knowing who this person is. You can see the interviewer was like, hell yeah, I'm like, and you just like, who is this person? But this is always how it is with subcultures, right? Like there's a lot of stuff that's important there that you might not know if you're not involved.
And he said, can I send her your stuff? And I was like, please do. And he apparently sent her all of the little black and white comics, and she apparently opened it and thought, I'll just read one or two, and then just sat there and read all of them in like an hour.
That's always how it goes. I did that when I found out about XKCD, a great webcomic. I was just like, oh, these are cool. I start reading them. I'm like, and at a certain point, I'm like, I'm gonna go back and read every single one that's ever been. That was a lot easier then than it is now. Now they have like thousands. Then they had like hundreds. But still, yeah, it's very easy to get wrapped up in that stuff.
And wrote back to Sam like, yeah, this stuff's good. Like, connect us. And then Sam was like, oh, you're going to Comic-Con this year. Andrew's going to be there. Go up to our panel, introduce yourself, et cetera, et cetera. So I went up like very nervously after a Comic-Con panel. I was like, hi, I'm Sam's friend. And she immediately gave me her business card and was like, let's work on this. And so she was such a mentor to me. She helped me through the whole pitching process. I initially pitched to the company just like a collection of all the little black and white comics. And I was thinking like a little square, like 4x4 inch, cute, tiny book. And they actually rejected that book pitch and said, would you instead redraw this material, the format of a full-size comics page in color, digital, and turn it into a more flowing narrative instead of like a bunch of vignettes and like short strips? And I said yes, because I had never received a book offer before.
Yeah, right. Yeah, how do you say no to that?
I genuinely had no idea if I could do it, but I was like, I'm not going to say
no. Figure it out, right?
And then, yeah, I had to do the process of like turning what had been a bunch of little tiny strips into like a book. One of the things I did was I printed all of them out and I laid them out on the floor and in chronological order for the first time, and to see which parts of my life I had written about a lot and which parts I had really not touched on. And what I realized is I had written a lot about the most recent 5 years, like grad school to the present
that makes
moment.
sense. It's more most present
about my
in your mind.
So I had to write a ton of new material about like specifically like the first 15 years of my life.
Yeah.
Is that called the recency bias? Oh, no, I think recency bias is something else. Yeah.
You also are. This gives you an excuse to then really play.
I think
with
these are from two very different parts of the book. If I remember correctly, the page on the right is from like the preamble, but the one on the left I think is close to the end of the book.
Using entire pages, and you're doing page compositions that are interesting and sort of. I mean, this sort of. Here with the lower left here, where you're doing a sort of allegorical drawings and stuff like that. So expanding out the imagination sort of around this book, how was that?
Yeah, it really helped that I had been traveling a lot those summers, and I had been carrying these sketchbooks that were roughly like this size, and this brand I really like. I actually think they might have gone out of business, but they're called Nature Sketch. They have like a really hefty watercolor. I'd been doing a bunch of sketchbook pages and like drawing like during a panel, like drawing people while they're talking. And when I was trying to go from like the squares to a page, I realized like I practiced drawing pages like in a sketchbook. And at some point I realized I could just make pages that looked like sketchbook pages. And that was like, that really kind of unlocked something when it was like, okay, some pages are panels and comics, but then if you skip to the next slide that I think is up there, like this is a page that like is the kind of thing I would just draw in my sketchbook where I'm thinking through like,
and it's a great image. I love this one.
I'm like just drawing an image. And
if I remember right, I appreciated the previous page more, but I do like this. This would be a great poster. Just like remove the text, put a background on it that's more like, like sun themed, like daytime stuff. That'd be such a great poster.
It's almost more like, it is almost more like an illustration paired with like a little piece of text. And I realized I could like weave those through. That helped. That was like a very like useful piece into the puzzle of turning strips into a book.
But then also with the book, you have to think about pacing, right?
Yeah.
So having these sort of moments where you pull back and you've got a full page spread, or these kind of really impressive illustrations that sort of stop the reader in their tracks. You had to sort of think in terms of pacing, right? So
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot. There were a lot of drafts. There was a lot of laying pages. Again, a lot of laying pages out on the floor and looking at them and then moving them around and actually switching the order of scenes and things like that. Like there were a couple of things. It was interesting, the talk this morning with Ronald Wembley and James Spooner, them talking about like the rules that you make up sort of while you're writing. And one of my rules is that every scene ended at the bottom of a page. No scene ended mid-page.
Fair.
And also I did not count on any double page spreads because I kept pulling pages in and out and the order keeps changing.
You can't be sure.
I cannot.
You might have one. You might have a double page spread planned, but then you remove a page prior, and suddenly it shifts, or you add a page, and it shifts, and suddenly it doesn't work. Yeah, I get it. Makes sense. Or people might read it like we read it, where it's in a PDF and just this long, like you don't get to see these two. My guess is if you were going to do the 2-page spread, the page that's on the projector right now and the one that comes before it in the book, that would be a really good 2-page spread, but you can't be sure necessarily unless you have like really, really good planning. Maybe like if you're adding stuff later, you can try that. I don't know. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Because I might have to move it earlier or later in the book. And I don't know what my double page spreads are going to be until like very late in the process. So every single sort of anecdote ends at the bottom of a page, and the new anecdote starts at the top of the next page.
I also want to bring in something that you mentioned before last night about how comics as an illustrative medium that you and it's especially powerful for queer narratives.
That rule, by the way, of like things starting at the beginning of the page and ending at the end of the page, in retrospect, I hadn't noticed it, but does make it feel in a positive way a little more episodic. It does get that sense of like you have a clear end, and like it makes it easier to take breaks in the book too. We were reading it in a particular way where like, it was just the way it was presented on that site. But if you're reading this on your own, when you get to the end of the anecdote, you can like put your bookmark in, you can close it, and you don't have to be like, where on the page was I? It's always the start of the next one, right?
You can draw yourself as you perhaps see yourself
probably
in
a good
the world
policy.
as others
Good
see
rule.
you can sort of play with that. It's really malleable and plastic. So something like this, for example, where you're creating it's a self-portrait, but it is sort of a mythological version. Like how. But I also feel like I know some creators who have like drawn themselves as literally cartoon rabbits. And Rick Worley, for example.
Yes.
But you also kind of go for a certain amount of realism. I mean, you look at photographic evidence of your own life. So how do you square this stuff? How do you sort of think about portraying yourself visually?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just was influenced by a lot of people. Like when in the little square version, it was also like this is going to be read on Instagram, so people are going to be seeing it like 2 by 2 inches. So we have to simplify. It has to be readable, very, very small. And then when I was expanding it out, I was just thinking about some of my favorite memoir authors and illustrators. I mean, Alison Bechdel is huge. She's probably one of the biggest artistic influences on me. And then also Erica Moen, who does Oh Joy Sex Toy, is another person that I read a lot.
I think both of those people came up in the book.
And then Lucy Nisley of like all her books. Oh my gosh, I've read all her books. And I think if you look at Lucy Nisley's work and mine, you can see even like the color palette is very similar.
I mean, yeah, you're influenced by the people
around you.
And so I
was just thinking,
like,
okay, how do you like make people a little bit like smaller and rounder and shorter so that you can fit more of them in a page, basically. It's even going back to like the reason why most like comic strip characters like Charlie Brown and Calvin and Hobbes are usually 2 heads tall, so that you can fit the whole character, their head, their entire body language in a panel and still have space for a speech bubble above them. So it is also like I'm not drawing quite in a strip, but if you scoot to a page that has more panels, like maybe going anyway, whatever.
Okay.
You'll
Let's
like
go
it's
back.
it's useful. Like I think this one is like drawing everyone a little bit like just like a little bit squished. Again, just so that you can fit like 3 tiers of panels on a page and have at least half body in each one, as well as like some body language with arms and shoulders, and then also space for a speech bubble. So
Seems like we're gonna get
Also,
to some of the more challenging
I think of
stuff
the structure of this book,
in the
like
book in a
Allison,
moment.
Like Allison, I think sort of broke open the idea of a graphic novel being sort of a graphic essay, right? Sort of essay
Yes.
format, right? And this does seem to me sort of a creative nonfiction essay about your own life and your journey with gender and sexuality. But you also have scenes, right?
Yes.
So how do you sort of fit scenes in with the essay?
Yeah, I mean, part of it was like I felt like when I was back to the conversations of trying to come out with people verbally, they would be like, yes, but like what does gender mean, or like why pronouns? And I felt like I wasn't
So hard to
very
answer
useful,
that
and
for
also I
anybody,
hadn't,
but
like, read
to be like to have the validity of your identity implicitly contingent on being able to explain that to somebody is one really shitty, but two like it's kind of an unreasonable ask, right? So that's a lot to ask of somebody.
a lot of like gender theory books. I had at that point not read any Allison, like a Judith Butler or anything like that. And I was like, well, the only thing I can give you is this like memory, this example, this experience that I lived through, and how
Which
that
is helpful.
felt
People
emotionally.
people
And, like,
learn a
this
lot
is
through
my evidence, is my
through
lived
example.
experience. And so in many ways I was like, I'm not going to try to big picture explain anything. I'm just going to present to you the evidence of my life and hope that when all of these pieces are read together, it makes a narrative that feels larger and feels more cohesive.
I think that
When
I
the
think
way
he
that it's
succeeded
lived
at
felt
that.
like a little piece, a little piece, a little piece, a little piece. But there were also then thematic things that I tried to do. Like I open with the scene of being a student in a classroom and this exercise, and then one of the very last scenes of the book is when I am teaching and I am giving students a
I hadn't
comics
realized
exercise.
the
So
book ending
there were a lot
there.
of things that I tried to like bracketing it with like classroom scenes kind of on either end of the book. There's also like 2 scenes of pap smears that are also kind of near the beginning and near the end of the book. Like these kind of thematic callbacks of like a threads that feel like they weave.
I forget the name of it. This was I remember learning once that that's a technique that was a lot more common, or maybe not more common, that was really common in like the ancient world. I remember listening to a lecture by Richard Carrier. It was a very interesting lecturer, uh, talking about the construction of the Gospels and saying that one thing that's kind of quirky about them and kind of leans towards maybe that they were more intended as fiction was that they have this structure to them. It kind of like you know how it's like, as was described, something can be bookended, right? Starts and ends with the same kind of thing. Well, what if you continued with that, and the second story and the second from last story are similar in another way, like maybe they're both pap smear stories in that case, right? And like all the way through, there's like this mirror effect in what kinds of stories are being told. No, it's not like you don't tell an identical story, but like you might have this corresponding element that is why this story is where it is, to the point where the gospel that he was talking about, which one it was, I forget now. He had mentioned that in that gospel it comes, towards the center, and then there's one story that's not mirrored. It's the center point of the book, and if I remember correctly, it's the story about how God hates figs. And I mean that actually figs, not like Steven Crowder pretended to. There was some story about like cursing a fig tree or something like that. I don't remember exactly. I'd encourage you to find it. It's a very interesting lecture by Richard Carrier, and I don't know which one it is, but like if you listen to his lectures, you'll find interesting stuff. So like I don't mind pointing you vaguely in that direction. I found it very, very interesting, but it reminds me a little bit of that. Apparently, that kind of story construction, uh, where you have mirroring throughout was at the very least common then. I don't know if if it's fallen out of favor or if it still happens or whatever, but um, that's not it's not unprecedented for sure. That is definitely a thing authors will sometimes do.
Through and then kind of tie it more nicely together.
Yeah.
It's harder to notice when it's throughout than with the bookends, right? The first and last thing is a lot easier to notice than throughout, but further analysis can yield more interesting. You can find more things of interest when it's built to have those things in there.
So I should say content warning. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, content warning after it's already been on screen multiple times. Yeah, content warning.
This is one of the most profound sort of
Yeah.
visceral moments in the book,
Yeah.
and it's sort of takes your breath away. I know this was not.
We've seen this
page.
already.
Yeah.
You do a lot of amazing things with lettering here. Talk to us about the process of creating this page.
Yeah, I mean, this was hard. The two pap smear exam scenes were the least enjoyable scenes to write and draw.
Yeah,
and
I can
remember.
understand that.
And the only time that I think when I was at this, like sitting working on my drawing table, was like, I'm so frustrated by this. I might cry because it's just, it's frustrating to remember this. It's frustrating to remember how powerless I felt. It's frustrating, just anything that has to do with interacting with the healthcare system as a person who is like AFAB and then like trans and non-binary, and trying to explain to people like the experience of living in your body and the type of care that you need, and all of this it's a wretchedly frustrating experience all around. And then trying to like capture that feeling of like pain and frustration and like all of that like in a still drawing. I think part of why this page is so blank is because I was like, it's either gonna be words or it's just gonna be like angry lines, because I don't even know how to visualize this like in a more concrete
it's
image.
really hard. Sometimes, like this is one of those things I was talking about, of being kind of trapped in your own skull. Of like, there are certain emotions and certain concepts that make sense in your head, but not in a way that is translatable to words. They more exist as primordial concepts or just like pure idea without form, as the way I think of it. And yeah, there's just some amount of that it's impossible to really express. Now artists try very hard and often do a very good job, but the totality of it is, to my mind, actually impossible. And it's back to, like, as I say, one of the tragedies of human existence.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, as you talked about last night, and
I guess the tragedy in a way is that we're allowed to reach out of our skulls at all. That we get shown a little bit of what we could have, but never the totality. Reminds me a little bit of Plato's cave. The people who are who like see that there is an outside, but cannot actually fully escape the cave.
This as well, where and even Trung, where there's moments when sometimes the images drop away entirely, and I mean, the brilliance about comics, of course, is this interaction between text and image, and you can play with both. You have both of these tool sets to work with. It's incredibly powerful. I mean, this really took my breath away.
I appreciate you. My mom also said I hate looking at this page, and I was like, well, that's kind of the point.
Yeah, me too. But yeah, obviously that's intentional.
Yeah, we need to at times create visuals that are both sort of
kind of upsetting. Yeah,
upsetting.
It is a feature of art, not a bug, that it can be upsetting and jarring. It is not. It doesn't need to be, but that is one of the valuable things art can do. Is make you uncomfortable, disturb you.
Quieting.
Yeah.
But that's the point of the art.
It is.
On the other side of the spectrum, this is like such a lovely image, and this is an image that
pretty.
starts out.
I didn't notice before. If you see in the bottom left panel, you see the same plant as being held in the page that we were saying it looks like a poster, where that person, I assume it's supposed to be Maia, is like holding this plant growing. It's the same plant. Which is pretty cool. Of like, it is a great representation of wanting to grow and have air place in this forest.
And this is like such a lovely image, and this is an image that starts out. There is a page in the book, and then you've turned it into an art piece.
Yes.
So, explain this sort of process of moving past the book, and like now you're sort of creating images. Yeah.
So this page is it's one of my favorites in the book, and it's also one that many people tell me is one of their favorites. And it's just this like metaphor that came to me, and it's actually even in the earlier black and white Instagram-y version of this too. There's like an earlier version. I just was like, how do I explain this gender stuff? And like, I just kept coming back to metaphors from nature. And I think it's partly I grew up way out in nature.
Which is useful too, because there's people who will wrongly say that these things are like unnatural or whatever else, and to draw the parallel with nature, or like the understanding of like it implies that thing I say all the time of like nature doesn't work in binaries, it works in spectrums, and in just things just are. They don't fit neatly into categories, they just exist all in a similar way. So to do trans people and non-binary people, they are a product of nature and just as natural as anything else.
Grew up on a piece of property that was like 100 acres in the Northern California woods that had no electricity and was like powered by like hydroelectric and solar panels, and we had an outhouse because we didn't have any flush toilets. I grew up in the woods. So I think it's very natural that I turn to metaphors from nature when I'm trying to explain things in sort of a more metaphorical or poetic way. And so this was just like one way that I thought to talk about gender is like, and it went from, you know, like early on, I think it's like I thought of gender as like 2 points, and then I thought of it as a line stretched between 2 points, and then that kind of unfolded into 3D, into like almost like a map. And then I was like, oh, it's like it's like a territory that you can travel around in, and it's like there's ups and downs and lefts and rights, like you can move across like a range of space. And I just sort of wrote this out, and then so many people actually asked me, would you ever turn that page into a poster? And I was like, maybe. So this is the page from
I wonder if people have asked the same about the one I thought would be a good poster.
Like an exclusive poster to release with a hardcover edition of the book, and also donate like 10% of the proceeds to a charity of your choice. And so I was like, well, I know exactly which page I'm doing because it's the one everyone has been requesting for 3 years. So I redrew the text of this as a poster, and we did it as like a nice like limited edition print on this like lovely archival paper, and then some of the proceeds went to the Trans Lifeline.
One of the things it also does is it sort of pulls back even more, where it could really, in the poster version, could be about anything. Like it could be about gender journey, but any sort of identity journey, or so it sort of broadens the scope of the meaning.
Yes.
Yeah, which is lovely.
Thank you.
Okay, so here's some stuff you've been doing since then.
Yes.
And
it seems like there's a tendency in these interviews to transition away from the book, which is fair, right? Like, my work is not exclusively this memoir. We'll see if that progresses too much past this, because for the most part, I'm interested in the discussions of the book we just read. But we'll let it play out for a little bit, and if it seems to be out of our interest, we can stop with this.
The deconstruction of the panels behind you, you're sort of playing with page layouts. How do you feel like your sort of formal experimentalism is getting more pronounced at this point?
Somewhat. I think so. And it's just, comics are so fun too. Like, they're just such a delight, and it's really fun to think about, like, how am I going to present this amount of information on a page visually. And so this was a piece that was done for a collection called The Baileys, which was like a queer and POC comic anthology that was organized by another CCA alum, Lawrence Lindahl. And I knew that I only had one page, but I could do literally whatever I wanted with it. And the time that the pitch or the magazine was like due was when I was early on in the process of trying to find a therapist and trying to get my health insurance sorted out and work towards top surgery. And so this was just all the stuff that was on my mind, and I was like, how do I fit this onto a page? And again, the the image in the center is like the emotional impulse that is driving all of this super annoying like phone calls about health insurance and Kaiser and paperwork and being approved for things and like all of that stuff in the background. So I knew I wanted all that to be like in black and white and a little bit more like, I don't know, you can see like the bureaucracy and the paper and the calendar pages and all of that, and they're like, but it's being driven by this emotional fire in the center of it all.
And it's a very comics thing to do, and I think that you really lean into what comics specific sort of language you can do. This is another comic you did about the same sort of experience, but it's very poetic. One of the things
another nature,
author Audre Lorde and Maxine Kingston
more nature imagery.
Talk about the idea of automythology, right? Where it's autobiography mixed with this idea of sort of making myth out of your own life instead of factual representation. I'm wondering how you relate to that concept, because this seems to me like the definition of automythography.
Well, first of all, that's very flattering because I love Audre Lorde. But yeah, I mean, we also talked about this in our panel last night where memory is imperfect and also sometimes telling something the exact way that it happened doesn't express the truth of it as well. And then
Yeah, sometimes stories are more truthful when told inaccurately to give you the sense of it. This comes up a lot. If we come across it, I'll try to remember to bring this up. But yeah, sometimes like you ever have a story where you like changing some of the details when you relate it to somebody, it gives more of how it felt than the actual facts of the matter. The one I can think of, not for me, but like I've had this, I've made this case to somebody before, was with Breonna Taylor, where like the story of her being shot in her own bed implies more truth than the fact of the matter, which was that she was in the hallway and she had gotten up. Because in the hallway implies like there's a standoff going on, whereas in bed implies that she was just going about her life when the police busted in and she ended up getting shot and killed. It is less strictly accurate to the events, but it tells a more truthful story about how it felt and the nature of the situation. This can happen all the time.
Winner also talked about that in the panel this morning of like needing to make one character from real life into two characters in the narrative so that like the emotional truth of it is better told. And so this is from a very short piece called Gifts. I do have a couple copies of this in print on my table upstairs. And what I was wrestling with in this piece was how to express like wanting to reject pieces of femininity that were kind of given to me, I guess, by being assigned female at birth, but wanting to reject them in an extremely respectful and loving way and saying like, I'm not throwing this away because it's trash. It is actually something that's really beautiful and powerful and important. It's just not for me. And so it's like setting
I appreciate
down
that sentiment, and it comes across a bit in genderqueer as well when it's never there's never a discussion of gender as like being useless, just as Maya just said, that it's beautiful, but not for him personally, you know.
this femininity, but in like the most reverent way possible. Like this is a precious gift that does not fit me or suit me. So I was like this feeling of like I wish I could regift it. I wish I could give it to someone who would need it, who would want.
A good parallel, in case that doesn't make sense to anybody watching, is, you know, if you're a person who, for example, doesn't like jewelry, but someone gives you a really gorgeous ring, well, you might appreciate that there is value to this thing and that it will be appreciated by someone, even if it's not for you personally, even if it's not something that you would want to wear yourself. Yes, I appreciate that too. Femininity was demonized so much by men and women when I was growing up. The anti-pink crusade was real. Yeah, for real. And I do really appreciate um, that Maya has that eye towards being respectful in that way, like the understanding that this is that that it could be misconstrued, and trying to be very tactful about not allowing that misconception. Yeah.
Want it, who would use it, or return it to the earth.
Yeah, thank you. Here's some more formal, some more recent
Oh
work
yeah,
as
this
well.
is
And
from
again,
that book.
you experimenting
That was being mentioned in the previous interview.
with comics formalism. Um, but oh, by the way, folks should think of questions you might want for,
Oh, yeah.
for Maya. In about 5 minutes, we'll be opening up for questions.
Start brainstorming.
So talk to us about what you want to do sort of next in comics, and how, you know, I know you want to return to some fictional work as well. How has the experience of doing this memoir work now shaped what you want to, you know, do moving forward?
Well, I definitely want to do both memoir and fiction, both going forward. I love them both so much. This specific page is from a short comic called The Final Project, which was for an anthology from Iron Circus Comics called Faster Than Light. And the story is about two queer high school seniors who are both working on a big science project. One of them is building a faster than light speed engine, and the other one is genetically modifying adzuki beans to try to make them like to be able to produce more like protein to feed a growing population on a planet facing climate catastrophe. What's that
Sounds
based on?
Yeah.
Anyway,
Could be
yeah,
anything.
this is probably my favorite page from the story, where I wanted to express that they're working in the same studio for like weeks and weeks at a time, and they just have this ongoing rambling conversation about their projects and about society and about this kind of
The
conversation.
panel does do a good job of like feeling cramped in that way. I didn't know that context, so but once he mentioned it, it does give you that sense of being trapped in this small space to working on this project. And well, I guess I didn't read it to know about the like the conversation that keeps going through all this time. But I guess where the speech bubbles are placed are intentionally giving that impression.
Have, I think, at any age, but especially as like teenagers, where you're like, is the conversation just like ranges over every topic, and you're talking about everything and you're talking about nothing. At the end of it, you feel like so close with this person, and it's again that like working side by side. So it's like each panel is supposed to like express like the week of a semester, but also showing that like they're just having this ongoing conversation for like the entire time.
Yeah. I mean, it's, and again, comic specific, right? Because of the allegorical nature of how comics handles time, it allows for this plasticity where you can have these sort of multiple time frames laid on top of each other.
Yeah, something kind of unique to the format, right? You can't really do that.
This comic is 20 pages.
Text
this was the longest thing I had ever published before Genderqueer. So I went from 20 pages to 240.
Oh, wow.
All right, let's see here. So you've also, this is from 3 panels from a collaboration you did with Rachel Pollack and Theater of Terror, Revenge of the Queers, which I edited, and Rachel was my writing mentor, which is like the sort of, I mean, it's this sort of...
So like in those panels, we don't really know what's going on, obviously. It's part of a larger story, but, it has that implication towards like something violence happening, there's blood. But I like to think, it'd be kind of funny, right, if it's like took a bite out of a tomato and it was like just too juicy, and so the red is just the juices splattered on this person's face. I mean, obviously it's probably not that, but it'd be kind of funny, right?
The generations of
but what if
That's really, that was really special. But these panels are so magnificent because it's sort of moment of awakening and of the character looking down upon her body that's been transformed. And I was wondering about you have collaborated with other creators before.
A few times, yeah.
So talk to us about how the collaborative process works for you. And I imagine
I think we got about as much out of this as I wanted. I think we don't need to keep going too much more. We're thoroughly away from talking about genderqueer at this point. Maybe there's more stuff. If you want to watch the rest of the interview, you're welcome to. But we've been at this for kind of a bit. So I'm really glad we went over these interviews. Thank you again, Amazon Came, for the suggestion. It was a great idea. One of the things that became clear as we approached this from like a political aspect or political lens is that this book was not intended for children. It wasn't aimed at children. Why do people pretend that it was? Well, obviously we know why. It's the fear mongering. It's the reactionary fervor that they're trying to drum up, so on and so forth. But Maia was just writing a memoir, and it's appropriate for who it's appropriate for. As it turns out, 18 plus. All right, fine. Why is it being banned in schools? Well, the amount that it was even showing up there was not our fault. It was being, maybe should be a little more scrutiny from high school librarians. That it's being banned has absolutely nothing to do with the book, or that it's inappropriate for people under 18, because so many books are inappropriate for people under 18. It's because of the reactionary attitudes of the people who are seeking to ban it. We even saw that the politician that wanted to crack down with obscenity laws on this and another book was doing so in part as a political stunt for a primary where they know reactionary action will be supported by their base. and this is the actual problem, is that these kinds of things are looked on favorably by the growing numbers of people who are openly reactionary in this country. We saw the same thing when we saw DeSantis shipping planes and buses full of asylum seekers and immigrants to other parts of the country, doing literal human trafficking to like drum up support with his base because they hate brown people or whatever. That's the real problem. And I'm glad we got more of an understanding of like, oh, this wasn't intended for kids. The 20-page thing might be because it's for like, it takes place in middle school. And my guess is it's not inappropriate in the same way. Like it probably doesn't have any adult content in the way that genderqueer does, but genderqueer is allowed to, and a lot of things are allowed to, and it wasn't abridged because why abridge a memoir? Of course, yeah, that makes sense. So now that we know that this whole fervor, now that we know, right, that this whole fervor was nonsense, we suspected before, but now it's like clear. We've read it, we've heard about why it was in schools, where this came from, that it had nothing to do with its growing popularity, had nothing to do about it being recently released. It's just about hating on queer stuff. Oh yeah, you're welcome, Amazon. Yeah, of course, of course. So yeah, I was going to read that article. I did find the one that Cam Gal was talking about. Christopher Hitchens talking about tea. We'll do that tomorrow. I think that's what we'll do to start things off, and we'll go from there. But it's been real. Glad we went over this stuff. Glad we read Genderqueer. It was a great book. Quite enjoyed it. Glad we got this context. The kind of thing I don't normally do, as I mentioned in the first interview that we were watching. Don't normally like seek to know that much about the creatives, but in this case, it's kind of important given the circumstances surrounding the book. Without those, I don't think it would. Like, I think we get all that we need to know and more from the actual contents. So yeah, I think we can be done with. I guess we finished our genderqueer arc, and we can move on to the next thing. Maybe do some debate review. You know, who knows? I don't really have a plan for tomorrow, so we'll stay tuned, as it were. If you haven't hit that follow button, please be so kind. Hit follow. I'm gonna be putting this VOD up on YouTube, so if you see it there, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.